Nostalgia Cast. I'm Darren Lundberg.
And I'm Johnny Craddock.
And today we'll be talking about a James Bond movie, which is weird since this is episode 98 and we're just barely talking about James Bond. I would have thought for sure we would have talked about him before, but oh well, we're correcting that today. So we'll be talking about The Spy Who Loved Me, starring Roger Moore. And this was originally supposed to be a special episode. I was just going to be the two of us, and then I just got an idea. Hey, maybe we'll invite Gareth Green back on again, who we had on for Forrest Gump. He's the one of the hosts of the Popcorn Digest. We didn't have his other host on. His name is Andy Raphael, and talking to Gareth, I just reached out and said, "Hey, we're doing The Spy Who Loved Me. I mean, would you like to jump on? Because their podcast, they cover James Bond in depth." And he said, "Sure. Would you like Andy to come on?" I was like, "Sure." And so within an hour, I scheduled something with Gareth and Andy, which is kind of crazy. I was like, "Oh, all right. I guess we're doing this." So we've been planning on this for like a week. It's kind of come together kind of frantically. And again, we're doing something different because when we were set to record earlier today, your internet wasn't working. Is that what was happening?
Yep. We ran into an unfortunate technical difficulty, and there's a big storm here where I'm living, and it interfered with the internet connection, and I could not get it to come back on, so I wasn't able to join you guys. We also had some issues with, the family being out of the house because the time changed. We kept changing the time
Yeah.
when we are going to record, so yeah, it just didn't work out the way it was supposed to. So
Okay. Yeah, and
unfortunately.
I think we said it before. I always hate it when I mean it's our podcast and it's kind of a bummer when one of us isn't here. But yeah, there was really nothing to be done. We'd already started the conversation. So we're gonna go ahead and skip over to the conversation that I had with Gareth and Andy, and then after that conversation, we'll come back here and we'll get your general thoughts on The Spy Who Loved Me, just so we can because you were telling me that you'd done some extra research, and I thought we might as well put that to good use.
I didn't do too much. Don't get too excited.
Okay, all right.
But hopefully my internet will stay connected while I'm talking.
Okay, that sounds good. All right, so let's skip over to that, and then Johnny and I will be back after that conversation.
All right.
Okay, The Spy Who Loved Me, 1977, directed by Lewis Gilbert, starring Roger Moore, Barbara Bach, Kurt Jurgens, hope I'm pronouncing that right, and Richard Kiel. Obviously, James Bond is, like we mentioned a couple episodes ago, James Bond is something we haven't discussed on Nostalgia Cast yet. We're almost to 100, episode 100, and I'm like, why haven't we talked about a movie character or series that's meant so much to me since I was a kid? And since we plan on doing 70s Palooza and The Spy Who Loved Me, I was going to do Moonraker, but our esteemed guests had already covered that. So I decided, why not do a James Bond movie that I actually like? So I figured if we're going to have guests on for that, I would invite back on not just Gareth Green, but also Andrew Raphael of the Popcorn Digest podcast. You know Gareth from our Forrest Gump episode, how much I gushed over that. These are my podcasting gurus. If it wasn't for these two, Nostalgia Cast wouldn't be approaching episode 100. Welcome, you guys. Gareth, Andy, how are you doing?
Yeah, good.
I'm good.
Very good.
Yeah, all good, thank you. Yeah, it's very interesting to be able to do a Bond episode as well with an American friend. That's a perspective we've never had on our show before.
Yeah, Bond is very British, and obviously it wasn't a hit, I guess, until JFK kind of mentioned that he loved From Russia with Love, and that's what kind of got America, kind of let's step up and start reading, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, yeah. But yeah, you guys, also speaking of episode 100, you guys just recently hit episode 100 with Popcorn Digest, which again, congratulations. And
Thank you.
I'm glad that you covered a Neil Breen movie.
Yes.
Way to ring that in. But Gareth,
the delight of no one.
Of no one, right? I loved it. But then again, I love everything you guys do. So Gareth, we've talked to you a little bit, but I do want to hear from Andy. If you want to just to again let us know what Popcorn Digest, or formerly Best Forgotten Movies, is all about, and how you and Gareth started that podcast, and how you became my favorite podcast on the internet.
Yeah, I mean it's such a long time ago. It's going to be 9 years ago soon.
Wow,
very soon. So yeah, to be honest, it just came about because, me and Gaz have known each other a long time, had a lot of movie nights over the years, and it just occurred to us that we should really just start recording our conversations.
Right.
So, and really, yeah, with the Best Forgotten Movies stuff, that was very much a case of doing that. And then we had a gap, and then when COVID hit, and obviously we couldn't see each other. It was just another way of hanging out, and also the when we changed the format, it made it very much looser, so we could talk about any film, because we were starting by the end to struggle to find films that were genuinely forgotten, and even then we sort of had to bend the rules sometimes. But so yeah, we're quite happy with doing that. The main problem with how we do it is that we just talk for far too long.
Yes,
so it's always a massive editing job to get the episodes to some sort of manageable length. And also, again, as I've literally just demonstrated, I have to edit out all the ers, ums, ahs, and stuff, and all the odd tangents that we tend to go down as well. So, yeah. So it's really a case of that. So the only reason we ever stop is when life just gets in the way, and also the editing for our podcast takes so long, because I'm very much a perfectionist.
Yeah.
So it usually runs out of steam because of those reasons. But we'll keep going at some point.
Right.
Yeah, it'll always come back
we
around.
We always say we'll do a shorter season.
Every season
we'll do 6 episodes, 8 episodes. Always ends up being 20 plus.
Yeah.
And it takes over our entire lives.
Right.
I get to do nothing else.
Well, just so you know, I wait with bated breath. I know you guys had a big gap, and I would check constantly, and then one day, all of a sudden, Chronicles of Riddick popped up. I'm like, what? Like a new episode? And so I jumped on that like immediately. So you've got at least one huge fan that's waiting for every one of your episodes. And yeah, like you talked about, it was the same thing with me and Johnny. Just like, we've known each other for so long. Let's start a podcast. Let's talk about movies. I couldn't figure out another guy to chat with. And then life stuff gets in the way. He had to move to New York. And so we decided to keep doing this. And it was the same thing. It was like, yeah, it was just a way to keep in touch and talk about movies. And again, you're absolutely right. The big problem with that first stretch of episodes is I just had to edit out every and and pause, just because I couldn't. And it's mostly me. Like, when I edit this episode, you guys aren't going to be touched. It's mostly going to be me that's going to be edited, because I can't stand the sound of my own voice sometimes. But yeah, I definitely understand the life stuff. I definitely understand the friend stuff. I definitely understand the podcasting stuff. But Gareth, I mean, since we last chatted, obviously, like, you did have more episodes. You kind of are in limbo again right now. What was the last episode you guys released? Was it the Santa Claus episode after?
Yeah, we released part 1 of our Santa Claus double bill, and I do have the second part like 90% edited here, and I'm just thinking I might just drop it. Like just drop it on the channel and see what happens.
Yeah, well, you listen to podcasts, and sometimes some of these podcasts, they just go on and on and on about stuff. And so sometimes I'm like, why am I cutting stuff out? Nobody else gets it. Like, they even have parts of like, well, I have to look something up, and they spend like 20 minutes just chatting about while one of the hosts looks up something on the internet. So I don't know. It's just I understand where you guys are coming from. So yeah, Popcorn Digest, obviously, I can't say enough about you guys. Again, it's a dream come true, not just to have one of you, but both of you on for this. And again, Spy Who Loved Me, talking about 70s movies, and I figured, why aren't we talking about Bond? And I thought, well, what 70s movies came out with Bond? And originally, like I said, we were going to do Moonraker, because I've always wanted to talk about that as far as like me having a rough time with Roger Moore movies, and how that one's kind of a rough one. But then I thought, well, all these 70s movies, we're covering movies that we love. Like, why would I want to just start and do the thing that the internet seems to be doing, or Twitter seems to be doing, which is just poking fun and ripping movies, which isn't, I mean, it's fun, but it's like, you know, I need a little bit more positive spin. So why not talk about The Spy Who Loved Me? And again, just on a whim, when I announced that in our last episode, I was thinking about it, thinking, well, I want to keep having guests on. Why don't we have Gareth back on? And so me asking him, having him say yes so quickly was like a dream come true. And I wanted to ask if Andy could come on, but then Gareth mentioned it. And so putting this together in so short amount of a time, I can't thank you guys enough. And it's kind of blowing my mind that we're able to actually all of us chat. I'm kind of looking at my screen. I'm sandwiched between the two guys that made me the podcaster I am today. So I hope that means something to you. But as far as our histories with the character, I kind of want to go over each of our histories. So, as far as the character, what it means to you, and how you got both of you became to be the Bond experts that you are, the Bond fans that you are. So, Andy, if you wanted to start, I mean, what is it about James Bond? What got you hooked, and what was your first intro to the character? Just what is your main history with the character?
Ooh, I'm just trying to think. I can't actually remember. It's one of those characters that I just grew up. It's like Star Wars, where you can't remember the first time you saw one of them.
Yeah.
Um, and for me, like my first Bond theatrical experience was GoldenEye. Even though I was 8 years old at the time, my parents managed to sneak me in. I don't know how they managed that, but they managed to get me in the theater. So I did actually see GoldenEye at the cinema, which makes me feel incredibly old. But I think even before then, Bond is such a, especially back in the 80s and 90s, it was always on the TV. So even in that wilderness years period before GoldenEye came out, you always saw James Bond on the telly, especially at Christmas time. So, and again, because it's British, it's kind of a part of the furniture, really. You
Yeah.
can't get away from it in a way. So that's part of it. It was almost like there was can't even pinpoint a particular thing that made me like it. It was just there, and I liked it, and then my interest has only grown from that point onwards. And I've read many of the novels. I've seen the films. Oh God, hundreds of times I think now. So yeah, it's a big part of my life, really, and yeah, there's not many other things that are comparable for me. I think the only other thing for me would be in film and television land anyway, would be something like Doctor Who, which is something I follow quite heavily. So yeah, that it's just, and again, I don't think it's not it's a series um I've always seen every single film in the theater. I've never truly lost interest, even though the series has gone up and down over the years, as it does. Um, so yeah, it's just a huge part of my life. Um, and again, I'm always picking up books. Like I literally just picked up the Lost Adventures of James Bond the other week for my birthday.
Hmm.
There's always new stuff. There's always more to explore as well, and it's such a great community. There's so many. Again, there's loads of wonderful YouTube channels, and there's lots to talk about, lots of comments. It's slightly solid at the moment because there's again there's a few issues with Eon with getting a new film out, and also considering what happened at the end of the last film, which has slightly divided the fan base.
Yeah.
So it's a bit of a strange time to be a Bond fan, but I still definitely am a Bond fan. But in fact, to the point where, because of all this, I've taken a break from it. It's been quite nice so coming back to watch Spy Love Me has been quite nice, because sometimes you get to a point where you watch the film so often, it's like you want to be surprised by them again, so you want to leave a bit of a gap, so you actually you know, to the point where you can't quite remember a couple of things. Whereas, you know, me and Gaz used to do Bond marathons. I think I've done the Bond marathon about 5 times.
Wow. Okay.
Takes about 4 days.
Wow.
And to be honest, it's the only real way of gauging the shape of the series, because
Yeah.
when you watch a film individually, it's a very different experience for when you're watching them in release order.
Yeah, completely.
After each other, you really get a feel for the ones actually hit home and the ones that really don't.
Right.
Yeah, it really does, and also you get a really nice sense of the shape of the franchise and where they went, where the highs and the lows, and what they learned, and some of the lessons that they didn't take. Like, you know, one of the biggest ones is the jump from On Her Majesty's Secret Service to Diamonds Are Forever is quite jarring.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the whole
So if you've got to spare 4 days to yourself,
Yeah.
we definitely recommend it.
Yeah,
it is a lot of fun, and it is very interesting. Although I'd say maybe I think usually days 1 and 3 are the best the way you schedule it out. I think days 2 and 4 are sometimes a slight slug, but for me, it's just always been there, and I can. You're noticing already. I can go on and on and on, which is why our Bond podcasts
Right.
originally always last about 4 or 5 hours before I have to edit them down.
yeah. Well, those conversations again, I love those. That's again a big reason I wanted to have you guys over here. So, Gareth, your experience with Bond. What does Bond mean to you? How did you come to love the character?
Well, me and Andy are of a similar age, so GoldenEye, I think, was the film that made me fully aware who Bond was, but I never got a chance to see it at the cinema. I remember family members going to see it, my mum and dad, but I didn't get the chance until it came out on VHS. Instead, I think the first film that I saw was License to Kill, and that painted a completely different picture of what Bond films were.
Yeah.
For me, you know, because that is a somewhat almost feels almost Americanized one in terms of, you know, what its subject matter is, and Michael Kamen's score,
and the Die Hard cast, like you talked about, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I love that film, and I continue to love that film. But so that was my introduction to it, and I've then seen Bond since. I watched all of the Pierce Brosnan ones after GoldenEye at the cinema. I've seen it pretty much. I've seen every single Bond film at the cinema since. But it wasn't until I met Andy that I truly went back and went through the entire series. It's always been something that I haven't been familiar with. Much like Andy, I can't remember a specific time where I suddenly can say, "Oh, that's where Bond entered my consciousness." You know, it's just something. Every bank holiday weekend, every Christmas, there was always a Bond film on. And I don't even remember watching films in their entirety. I remember them being like wallpaper, you know, like the part of the furniture in a house with family around.
Right.
And so it's always been like a communal experience watching a Bond film, and that's how they're best enjoyed, in my opinion. So yeah, that's been my experience with it, and I think that's the experience of a lot of people of mine and Andy's generation as well. But yeah, I since then I've gotten familiar with the entirety of the series. With Andy, I've done the Bond marathon a couple of times, and that is an experience. That's I ran a marathon, and the Bond marathon was sometimes harder than the marathons. No, it's very regimented because it has to be.
Yeah.
You know, sleep is sparse; it's for the weak. But yeah, I'm much like I have a very similar experience to Andy, and I'm firmly a fan now, hugely so.
Well, you guys talk about watching franchises are interesting because they shape themselves, they reshape themselves, they reform themselves, and so I love that. Like watching them in order, it's more interesting because you can see. Not like the MCU where you see like the story being told, but also from the perspective of how they make them and how they react to the previous ones and how they react to the public. So watching franchises in that way, I think that's the best way to do it because you appreciate kind of the ebbs and flows instead of just because you mentioned On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Roger Moore was my James Bond growing up. That's the James Bond that I got introduced to. So when you watch Moonraker and Octopussy and A View to a Kill, and then you watch On Her Majesty's Secret Service, it's really off-putting because you don't expect, you know, Her Majesty, which is top 2 or top James Bond film for me now. But when you watch it as a kid, you're like, what is this? This isn't Bond. Yeah. You know what I mean? Your Alan Partridge expression of you're getting Bond wrong. That's the thing. It's like this isn't what James Bond is. So it can be that way. So again,
It's always only a matter of time, by the way, until somebody says on a podcast episode about Bond,
they're kidding.
you're getting Bond wrong. We've now hit that mark.
Good. Which it should. That should be the catchphrase.
Yeah.
So my history with Bond, again, I've mentioned several times, maybe to you, Gareth, and I was an only kid growing up, and so my mom was a single mom, and so her being gone all the time, trying to support us, she wanted to make sure that I had all the best things that a growing boy should have, right? But she didn't just give me like, this is what I think you should like. She gave me choices and kind of put things in front of me, and the three things that I latched onto, which again I thank my mom for this, I latched onto Transformers / Voltron. I guess it's the kind of same thing. I latched onto Godzilla, and I latched on to James Bond. So those three things have been kind of my founding experience since I was a kid. And that's everything I've loved since when I can first remember watching movies, right? Or any kind of media. So like I said, I started watching the Roger Moore ones, which are very different from the Sean Connery ones, right? But then when you watch Sean Connery, you still get it. Like, it's different. He's a little more edgy, but it's still kind of the same. And then you watch Timothy Dalton. And again, my mom helped me kind of hone my film critic skills because I was a big Roger Moore fan. And then when Living Daylights came out, I think the thing with Living Daylights is everybody was so used to the Roger Moore goofy comedy stuff that when Living Daylights comes out, I know Roger Ebert's review kind of seemed to react to this. It's like, this isn't Bond. You know what I mean? It's like, why is he so serious and dark? And so it's off-putting, again, like I said, when you watch it. So when Living Daylights came out, and since I started reading film critics, my mom was like, she would always grab me for movies. She's like, let's go watch Living Daylights. And I was like, but Mom, it only got 2 stars, right? Like that's the determining factor. So we went to go see it anyway, and I loved the Living Daylights. I don't know what it was. Like sitting there, however old I was, maybe 10 years old, watching Living Daylights in the theater. I got it, right? But she helped me hone that, which is like, why am I listening to critics? Why am I just not listening to myself? Why am I not formulating these ideas myself, right? So my mom and Bond kind of formulated, again, who I am now, right? So again, so that's my history kind of with it. And again, things ebb and flow. When I started reading the books, I haven't read all of them. I think I've read Casino Royale, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, those kind of things. The Bond of the book seemed very different to me than what Roger Moore was in the movies. And maybe I'm getting that wrong, which is kind of the next question I want to ask. But like that kind of maybe reassess the whole series and reassess what I thought about Bond. But I mean, Andy, you're our resident Bond expert. I mean, am I getting that wrong? It seems in the books that Bond is very disillusioned. He's kind of he thinks about death and murder all the time. Like he's kind of just not interested. But the Roger Moore is more like, he treats that like nonchalant, like it's just part, like a desk job is how he kind of treats that. Am I getting that kind of dichotomy wrong with the character and how Roger Moore portrayed him?
No, definitely Roger Moore's the furthest away from the literary Bond as you can possibly get. I think pretty much every other Bond actor gets an aspect of the literary character in their performance, but Roger Moore, he does take, he's kind of the face value Bond. He kind of takes what you think James Bond is, but then, you know, because if you look at the literary Bond, it goes into great detail about extravagant meals, extravagant hotels, but when you actually dig a little deeper, it very much talks about the solitary nature of that. Usually he eats a meal by himself. Like, it could be a really nice meal, but it's on his own. And there's a certain loneliness and despair about the character that pervades the entire book series. So I think Roger Moore, it's almost like he glanced at the book and took his interpretation from that. But I think also with his portrayal, is more born out of the producers themselves not knowing where to take the character at that point. And it's very much evident in his first 2 entries where, especially in The Man with the Golden Gun, like it's famously where they tried to make him more like Sean. There's the whole scene in The Man with the Golden Gun where he twists Andrea Anders' arm, and they try to make him more brutal, and it doesn't quite work. Whereas with The Spy Who Loved Me, this is where James Bond becomes Roger Moore,
Yeah.
and the two are forever entwined. So, yeah, so the Roger Moore's a real one-off figure, because I feel like every other James Bond actor, they're trying to play James Bond. They're trying to dig something out of the books to offer their own interpretation of the character, whereas Roger Moore is being Roger Moore. So it's a very different era of the series, but I think it's one of those ones where it's what people needed at that particular time.
Right.
But it's a really odd part of the series, especially it's such a huge chunk of the series as well. Even as the series has grown, it's still, it's about a quarter of the films of Roger Moore. And yeah, it's the James Bond films where there's not really a James Bond. There's this other kind of figure in the films. They become something else, and it's strange when you go back to The Living Daylights, because James Bond comes back in that sense. If you jump from On Her Majesty's to The Living Daylights, and then all those other films in between, Diamonds Are Forever included, they are a weird batch of films. I love them, but they, as James Bond adaptations, are about as far away as you can get. I think the only one that comes anywhere near to being James Bond as Ian Fleming saw him is probably For Your Eyes Only, where they did try and ground him back again. So, yeah, it's a really strange thing. But yeah, Roger Moore is really out on a limb, which probably explains why he, when people do rankings of the James Bonds, he usually tends to come out quite low for a lot of people.
Right.
I think you do get the odd person, but I think, generally, because he's so far away from what is going on with James Bond as a literary character, and again contrasting with all the other actors' performances, it's just a thing on its own, really. It has its own charms, but it's not really James Bond. That's the only way I can describe it. It's something else entirely.
No, that's a great way of putting it. As far as it's Roger Moore as, you know what I mean? It's Roger Moore. It's not necessarily James Bond.
Roger Moore.
Yeah, that's really an interesting way to put it. And again, the way that I look at, I mentioned franchises. I kind of look at franchises. I get bored with like the same old, because it's like, well, I could skip a bunch of these, right? It's like, why am I don't have a lot of time to watch movies anymore, so I don't want to watch stuff that I've seen before necessarily. And yeah, again, for me, and it's nothing against Roger Moore. Like when I look at my bottom three are Roger Moore movies, and I don't know, I just can't help it. Maybe it's just because the character, the way he portrays it, or the way that they portray him, just doesn't quite work. Gareth, what do you, as far as what Andy's talking about, is there anything you wanted to add to that, or any other kind of perspective as far as how the series has formed itself?
Well, I mean, I want to mention something about what you've just picked up on as well, and that is in terms of like James Bond as a mainstay, is like a franchise, and there are a few franchises where I think the continuation of that franchise is important. There's a lot of times when we talk about Star Wars, even now, especially now, when I'm like, please give it a rest.
Yeah.
Or Marvel films, give it a rest.
Yep.
With Bond, there's never a point in which I want them to stop. In fact, I think the opposite. I think it's important that they continue because it's become so entwined with history and such a representation of certain social attitudes through the ages that I think it's important they continue to make them and continue to adapt Bond to current ways of thinking, to modern ways of thinking, contemporary ways, because later on down the line we get to look back at this series and we get to charter the changing social attitudes of the public through an entire series, and there is no better series to do that with. I don't think there is really a rival series out there. Maybe Star Trek, in order to do that. Star Trek is very much like the opposite end of the spectrum for that. But yeah, I think it's important that this series continues and continues to reshape itself as time goes on.
Yeah, they are little time capsules.
Right.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, you can.
There's a time capsule of the year it was made.
Yeah, you can see the way that the movies kind of react to other things that are in the zeitgeist as well, right? I mean, it's interesting watching Bond movies with the Mission Impossibles out or with the James Bournes out or the John Wicks now. No Time to Die has a segment where it's Craig walking up a staircase and it's like a 2-minute shot or something like that. I was like, well, this is very John Wick. So they're kind of, which John Wick can be looked at as being James Bond or one man killing me. So they all kind of feed into each other and kind of play off each. And I think that's what's interesting because you kind of see. I think maybe it's dangerous if you start, because there have been certain points. I think maybe the fourth Mission Impossible, I was watching that with my wife and I was like, well, why do we need James Bond anymore? Like we've got Ethan Hunt, we've got Jason Bourne. It's like, why do we, but I do think it's interesting, like you said, they're time capsules. You're watching them kind of form and reformat over the years according to what people are liking or disliking, right? I think the Craig movies, the way, and it's controversial, I guess, but the way that they kind of tackled it as a series of stories being told, an overlapping story, as opposed to just individual, one-offs, right? They're trying to make a character so it begins with him starting and begins with, and ends with him ending, that kind of thing, instead of just being little snip. I think that's interesting, and we'll talk about it later as far as what Bond should probably do after that. So it was a nice little play that they tried. I don't necessarily, but it's fun watching them all in, the different bites, the different, like I said, the different episodes of Bond, I guess you could say that they've done. So yeah, The Spy Who Loved Me. Andy, you said something very cool that I've always thought of, is I thought Live and Let Die and Man with the Golden Gun were kind of like trying it, but I don't think more really settled into the part until The Spy Who Loved Me. And I think it is Gilbert saying, why are we treating you like Connery? You're not Connery, you're Roger Moore. Let's do it from Roger Moore's perspective. And even though Roger Moore might not be as liked as other Bonds, I think that was an interesting kind of play. But with The Spy Who Loved Me, if we kind of wanted to seek into that, I mean, that's kind of an interesting seeking point. Like, Andy, like I said, you're the resident Bond expert of Popcorn Digest. You always go into like the history and the context. If you could give us some context of how we got to The Spy Who Loved Me, that would be great. Just so we can, our readers on this side of the aisle, we can let them know what Bond was up to this point.
Yeah. Because the Spy Who Loved Me, the film, is a very important film within the history of the Bond franchise. I'd say it's probably has the same level of importance as Dr. No and GoldenEye, maybe Goldfinger, because without that film doing what it did, there may have not been more James Bond films. It's the stakes for this one were quite high at the time due to many different factors. So, and also because of the type of film it was, there was a lot riding on it as well. So, so to give some context, like we were talking about with Live and Let Die and The Man with the Golden Gun, they were Roger's first two films, and with Live and Let Die in particular, it was the first time it was their second attempt at a new Bond actor, because famously, in Eon's eyes, George Lazenby had failed as a replacement for Sean Connery, and they got Connery back for Diamonds Are Forever. And it's a very weird when you watch that in sequence where it's a different Bond actor for about 4 or 5 films. It's very odd. And then with Live and Let Die, they really tried to carve a different identity down. Like I think he had a different choice of drink, different gun, all sorts of different things. They tried to make him different from Sean. And Live and Let Die does actually quite well. It's a very odd film in context, because it does lack in, like, there's no Q in there, the score is a bit weird. Harlem's
not quite as exotic as
it's very, very 70s. And also, I think the scale of the films at that time was starting to get smaller.
Yeah.
And I think that's just again down to that influence, that outside influence of 70s movies, especially early 70s movies, when you're thinking like, yeah, the blaxploitation movies and films like Serpico and things like that. And with The Man with the Golden Gun, you've got the Eastern influence, like the Bruce Lee films,
Yeah.
things like that. But you can sense that they're trying to go in a different direction, but things are just not quite clicking into gear. And the other issue with The Man with the Golden Gun, because Live and Let Die had done so well, they fast tracked The Man with the Golden Gun. So it actually came out 18 months after Live and Let Die. They pushed it for a Christmas 1974 release as opposed to a summer 1975. Like they were in a 2-year pattern at this point, but it was like 18 months. So it has a very rushed feel. I have great affection for The Man with the Golden Gun, but I do appreciate that it does feel quite rushed and a little bit tired in places, even though it has one of the best villains and actors. There's certain things about it that don't come together. I mean, it has one of the worst Bond girls in there as well.
Yeah.
Which is a shame because that character is such. If you read the books, she's like second only to Moneypenny as a character in the book series, which is weird why they did that character so poorly in the film.
Right.
But yeah, you just got the sense that things weren't quite gelling for whatever reason, and this is reflected in the box office for The Man with the Golden Gun. So I didn't do Live and Let Die, but it made quite a lot of money anyway. But like Man with the Golden Gun was made for 7 million, so at this point the budgets were around about the same film to film as well. So made for $7 million, which is about $40 million in today's money. Makes 97.6 million at the box office, which equates to about 610 million today. So that's a disappointment.
Right,
so
yeah.
made for 40 million, makes 610 million. Oh dear.
Yeah.
That's the kind of
Times have changed.
It makes me laugh when they talk about Bond films failing in this period, because when you actually look at the numbers, they're making so much change. It's ridiculous, especially when you think about even the more modern Bond films, the Craig films. Their actual returns are quite small compared to what they were getting in the 60s and the 70s. So yeah, so having said that, there was a lot of behind the scenes problems that were also causing the films to suffer a little bit, and the main thing was that the fallout of Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli, and Harry Saltzman ultimately selling his stake in Eon and Danjaq to United Artists. So instead of just distributing the films, he effectively was co-managing the series with a major studio, which had its own issues because it meant that there were more fingers in the pie.
Yeah.
So it ended up being that the gap between The Man with the Golden Gun and The Spy Who Loved Me was the biggest gap between films in the series to date. I think it's like over 2.5 years, which would have been an age at the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a lot riding on it because even though those numbers are actually not bad, it felt like at the time the series was running out of steam and it was going to be a law of diminishing returns at this point. Because we have to understand at the time as well that studios didn't make sequels to films.
Right.
You didn't really get franchise, and usually if you did have a franchise, it would make less money than the last one. You have to look at say Planet of the Apes for a series that does that, or even later on the Jaws films did the same. So we're not talking about an era where studios actually wanted to repeat the same thing. We're in this rather bizarre time when they actually want to make new films all the time. So for them to dump the Bond series at this point would have actually been quite logical. So yeah, so this is the point that they're at. and Roger is, I think they did a 3 picture deal, so he is contracted to be James Bond for The Spy Love Me anyway. But this is very much a let's get the dream team back together again and really make a go for it. So instead of like cutting the budget and making a a smaller, more economically sound film, they actually double the budget for this film and just decide to hedge the bets and do something spectacular. And I think also again it's that thing where even in the way that they shot the previous 2 films, I think they're the only 2 films in the series where they're not filmed in widescreen, apart from like I think the first 3, like the first 3 Sean Connery films were filmed in not a real like proper widescreen aspect ratio. But the Roger Moore films, the first 2, they'd gone back to this kind of more regular gritty 70s style, and with The Spy Who Loved Me, they go back to a much more grander cinematic widescreen feel.
Right.
Everything's bigger, and it hadn't been that way since I'd say Honor Majesty's has a certain level of grandeur, but one of the big reasons really they got Lewis Gilbert back was to give this sense of spectacle, because that was his first James Bond film, which is You Only Live Twice. It's still probably the biggest looking James Bond film. So you've got all that, and again,
it's almost like The Spy Who Loved Me is one of many major make it or break it moments that happen throughout the entire series run. Like this is this is one of the main ones.
And it's I think in one of the books I've got that talks about this film talks about it as a greatest hits package. You actually dissect it, it really is a little bit of everything in this film, to the point where some scenes are actually identical to some scenes in previous Bond films. I think there's a scene where when they're on the Liparus, where there's the monorail pulls up to where they're gonna break out all the submarine crews, and that sequence is identical to the one in the hollowed out volcano where the monorail pulls up to where the astronauts are being imprisoned. And it's like it's the same production designer, same director. You know, things
same
like that.
Studio space.
Well, that's the other thing as well. Like they built a fucking sound stage.
The 007 stage,
like,
the Pinewood, right?
Sound stage around the set. So there's so much. This is really where the Bond films they start ramping themselves back up as a major force, because I think as a production team they'd kind of just been going through the motions, so this really was a big kick up the backside for the whole Bond production team to really like, let's just go 110% into this and try and make it work and get people back into the theaters. You know, it's like what we were talking about. It's literally a case of like, let's get people back to the cinema to see James Bond. And the only way we're going to do that is make something that you can't see on television or on any other gritty 70s, type film. Insert, other 70s films are available pre-Star Wars. So it's a case of, just trying to make everything bigger and just more bombastic. And again, they have carte blanche to do this because they have this title, Spy Who Loved Me, which is based on it's a Bond novel, but famously Ian Fleming did not want them to use any of the story. It was actually written into the contract when they got the rights, and they still had to double check that they were allowed to use the title. But it did give them carte blanche to do whatever they wanted. which I think helped. So yeah, it's a real,
Isn't it as well?
critical
Just speaking
film.
about the book for a moment. Sorry,
Yeah,
there's there's an oddity about the book in terms of the
Yeah.
way that it's written. It's written from from another person's perspective of Bond.
Right. Viv,
So
I
it's
think
like-
is her name. Right.
Yeah, exactly. I've never read the book, but I just know that it's the oddity of the group as well. So maybe there's something in that as well.
yeah. Bond only appears in the last third of the book,
Right.
so it's divided into three, and I think the titles of each section are called Me. So that's written from the female protagonist's perspective.
Mhm.
And then the second part is Them, which is where the two henchmen come to terrorize her.
Yeah.
And then the last section is called Him, and it's when James Bond appears and saves the day. So it was an experiment on Fleming's part to try and attract more female readers into the series, but on his part he thought it failed,
Yeah.
which is why he didn't allow them to use any element of the story. The only thing they did use partially was the description of one of the henchmen, which is kind of Jaws but not, which is the character in the book called Horror.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's literally all there is. Everything else is just made up. But to be honest, the plot is very, very similar to You Only Live Twice anyway. I
Yeah.
mean, to be honest, all three of Lewis Goldblatt's films basically have the same plot. So yeah, and it, it's a formula that worked because all three films did very well at the box office. So, and it's strange with Lewis Gilbert as well. I think we talked about it when we talked about our Moonraker episode, that Lewis Gilbert is known for doing these huge James Bond films, but if you look at the rest of his filmography, very, very small films indeed. You're talking after doing something like Moonraker, only a couple of years after there was doing something like Educating Rita.
Oh, yeah.
And the film he did before You Only Live Twice was Alfie. So yeah, very odd films within his filmography. But yeah, there was a lot riding on this, and again, I could go on and on and on about the production of this film because there was just so many elements and moving parts, because the whole film is so huge. Even by today's standards, it's still quite a huge Bond film. There's some films they just after this sort of Spy Who Loved Me Moonraker point, I don't think there's another James Bond film that really approaches the level of grandeur that these films do.
Yeah, that's
all of them still feel quite relatively small scale in comparison.
yeah. Well, you mentioned a couple of interesting things. It's kind of like Live and Let Die filmed in the smaller, like not widescreen 2.4 ratio or whatever. They feel more like TV movies, right? They're scaling back, so it feels like you're watching something on TV, and then you go like when they invented CinemaScope to get people back in theaters. Right? That's kind of what Spy Who Loved Me kind of feels like.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about Spy, but if Andy, like I know you can go on and on, but are there any, like if you could name maybe two, because I'm interested, any like two factoids about the making of the movie that you especially like? I mean, are there any behind the scenes trivia about the Spy Who Loved Me you'd like to share with us, like on that smaller scale?
I mean, I like that Stanley Kubrick helped light the set.
Yeah.
Because they were having trouble lighting the huge Liparus set.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of a sad story, really, because the cinematographer, who was Claude Renoir, was actually the grandson of the painter Renoir.
Wow. Okay.
He was starting to lose his sight, and it became more obvious in the next film because they actually had to replace him. But I think it had started at this point, and he couldn't actually see back into the set to actually see how far, with the light meters and everything. And also because a set hadn't been built like this since You Only Live Twice, but it was actually it's very much a metallic set with lots of reflective elements on it. So because Ken Adam, the production designer, had a personal relationship with Stanley Kubrick, having production designed Doctor Strangelove and Barry Lyndon,
Yeah.
prior to that. He just called up Stanley one day and said, "Can you come and help me with this set that how they're having trouble lighting?" And he did it on the proviso that they did it on a weekend and no one would know. So yeah, so with Stanley being the master of photography that he was able to get all the lights put in the right places so they could actually work with the set practically without having to do too much messing around once it actually got to the filming stage. So that's one of my favorite stories about The Spy Who Loved Me. And then the other one is that matte shot that we always talk about it, don't we, guys?
The painted Bond,
famous painted James Bond, in the middle of the pyramids sequence where they literally didn't have the shot, so they literally got someone to paint Roger Moore as a matte painting and just stick him in there for 3 seconds of film.
Oh wow!
And you don't notice it's there until someone tells you, and then whenever you see it, it's like, oh god, it's just a matte. It's just a matte painting of Roger Moore, like peering behind a wall.
Yeah,
it's almost like fortunate for the film that there's so many different composite elements throughout that entire scene, because your eyes constantly drawn elsewhere because you're like, oh, those pyramids aren't really there, are they? This looks like it was filmed separately, and then you've got a painted Bond in the corner on your screen. So it almost helps that there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, I think the other fun fact I like from this film is all the model work of the submarines and the tanker. They were all done in the Bahamas. So the actual camera that they placed for the sort of higher up aerial shots. So, in Casino Royale, they have in the sort of opening parkour chase sequence, there's that hotel that's being built that kind of everything explodes around. So that was actually a real unfinished hotel, which they actually used that during Spy to shoot on top of, shooting out into the ocean. And that's actually right next door to where Largo's hideout is, in terms of the actual sort of villa. So that was right next door to that, because it's all part and parcel of the same plot of land. So that little part of the Bahamas has a huge Bond history, being involved in so many different films. And the reason that hotel was used is because Michael G. Wilson was supervising the models as part of his production associate producer role, I think he had in this particular film, and had remembered that unfinished hotel from when they stood on top of it to shoot all these models shots, for Casino Royale, and going, I know where there's an unfinished hotel in the Bahamas.
Wow.
So that's where you get a feeling with the Bond films. They are quite special in the fact that it is like a big family, and there's lots of different areas, different departments where there's family members working in each department. They move up the ranks. There's a lot of shared experience, which for me, I fear is getting lost as the gaps between these films get longer and longer.
It's almost like a family atmosphere. That famous Fast and Furious thing. Family.
Who's that?
Mi familia.
Yeah. But yeah, that's definitely something that's getting lost. But with at this point, you've got almost like a reassembly of certain elements of the family. I think the only real key person he's missing from this particular part of the process is John Barry.
Right.
I think he's the only person they couldn't quite get, probably for tax reasons. I think actually definitely for tax reasons.
Right.
I'm just looking at my Music of James Bond book, and literally when you get to the mid 70s and 80s, when it talks about John Barry, usually the very first reason as to why he's not on say a certain film was because he couldn't be there for tax reasons.
That's crazy.
The only reason the only reason he did Moonraker is because they had to move to France, and it was an Anglo-French production. He could write the the film and score it and have it recorded in France, so he could actually do that for tax reasons. So.
Yeah. Well, all this, like, again, for anybody listening, you covered this extensively during the Moonraker episode, which again was just fascinating. So please, everybody needs to go for that, right? But you're talking a couple of things. You're talking about family, and one of the notes I have, it was great seeing stalwarts like Peter Lamont and Alec Mills and John Glenn and Derek Meddings and Loris Bender, obviously, and Ken Adam, like we talked. It was great seeing their names in the credits because you're like, oh, I know them. They're going to become big later on. So it is that family kind of dynamic that, Cubby is going to promote you up for your loyalty, right, and reward you for that. So I do like that. And you mentioned something too about the, and that's something I had in these notes, like, oh, here's the volcano set, even though I think it's very well lit and very well structured, it's that. But it's also, that's what you kind of go to James Bond movies for. You want to have that and recognize the form. You want to go and have the comfort of recognizing certain parts, right? And that does make sense, but it's more of a case of, well, Live and Let Die did fine, Man with the Golden Gun kind of slipped off. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Let's go back to what did work. Let's go back to the widescreen. Let's go back to Ken Adams' grand sets. Let's go back to all the bits and pieces that worked I don't have a problem with that. I just think it's fun recognizing those things. One of the notes that when they're on the train in The Spy Who Loved Me, I'm like, is it just because so many other scenes in the franchise become so iconic that we kind of tunes us out? Because all I could think of during that train sequence was From Russia with Love, right? Because that's the iconic part of that stretch of the movie. So, but is that, I don't know if that's necessarily a flaw or just something that you go to franchises for, just to watch, right? I mean, Gareth, did you have any ideas about that?
I mean, sorry, I'll just be sorry, just be a second. I had notes on my computer and they just went down. So I was just reopening the file. Yeah. Sorry, can you ask the question again if that's okay?
I mean, as far as the franchise goes, like recognizing parts, is that part of the fun of the franchise, or is it a flaw in franchises that we can recognize things?
I personally think that there has to be a compromise to be made when it comes to that. There has to. It's a delicate balance, and we have seen it done well. We've seen it done well recently, I think, with Mission Impossible Fallout. Yeah. For example, was a film that felt like a celebration of the series that came before it. And conversely, I think we saw it done very badly in the Bond franchise with Spectre. Yeah. And there comes a point where are you hitting beats because are you just simply going through the motions and hitting beats just because this is what audiences expect to see? Or have you got something to say about them? And I think a film that has something to say will always will always be more valuable than one that is just kind of presenting audiences with familiar tropes. And yeah, I think Bond has had those films that are celebrations of the series, but the ones that stick with me and the ones that I go back to are the ones that even when they're doing that, they still have an edge. They have something else going for them. It may be something that's, it might just be the music or the cinematography or a certain way the editing feels. Suddenly the editing's a lot more kinetic in this one, even though it's doing some things we've seen before. Yeah. It's that kind of thing. And so, yeah, it is a delicate balance. And I guess it always comes down to emotion for me. If I'm emotionally invested, I'm always along for the ride.
Yeah. Well, looking at the James Bond movies, I think that the Bond movies kind of slot into three different categories. I think they have good formula Bond movies, they have bad formula Bond movies, and then they have the Bond movies that either break the mold or kind of set the standard. And I don't like knocking Roger Moore because apparently, he was a very lovely man in real life, right? There's nothing bad that's been said about him. I just think it's funny. I think The Spy Who Loved Me is one of the good formula Bond movies, but the sad thing is, for me saying this, is that it's my favorite Moore movie. So my favorite Moore movie is just a good formula movie. You look at Sean Connery; he set the standard with Dr. No and with From Russia with Love, and even maybe controversial to a lesser extent with Goldfinger, that kind of set the tone and the format for the rest of the series. They're all following after Goldfinger a lot. And then you have Lazenby's On Her Majesty's Secret, which again broke the mold and reformulated what we thought of Bond, right? Then you have Timothy Dalton with License to Kill, like you talked about, Gareth. It's like you're starting with that one. That's like a break the mold Bond movie. You know what I mean?
So exactly. Yeah.
Even that one broke the mold. And then I think Craig has at least one. Like Skyfall it fights for On Her Majesty's Secret Service for me as far as my favorite Bond movies. But I think as far as telling a story about this is what Bond is, and we're going to do a study of him instead of him just being a character with all this crazy stuff. I like and a visual storytelling standpoint. I think Skyfall kind of breaks the mold from what other Bond movies do. But it makes me feel bad because Moore's best movie, I feel, is just a good formula. I don't feel like it breaks anything. It just kind of says, yeah, this is a good Bond movie. This is what Bond movies should be. And then, again, this is kind of a side tangent. My favorite things about podcasts are either, number one, that they engage me and keep me interested, which is what Popcorn Digest does. And the other thing is they make me angry in that I have to reformulate my thoughts on something. So when you guys did your Bond ranking and you put Pierce Brosnan at the very bottom, like that made me angry at first because I'm like, oh, but I like Pierce Brosnan, right? But then you guys, I think it was Andy, said something very interesting, is that Brosnan didn't really bring anything new to the character, right? You had Connery set the standard. You had Moore, who was his own comedic kind of take. You have Dalton, who's like back to the edgy Bond more than Connery, right? You have, again, Craig, who's more like the Fleming Bond. And then you have Brosnan, he just kind of had a meld of the comedic Connery part. So he didn't really bring anything new. And his movies are all, it's diminishing returns. I would even say I think GoldenEye starts out really strong, and then it kind of slopes off for the end, and that's kind of what all the rest of the Bond movies, his Bond movies are. They're not, I think they each start off promising, and then they just kind of go off. Yeah. They fall to shit, so to speak. But that, again, that's what I loved. It was like, okay, well, now I have to, because they're right. Like, Moore, even though right now, in my estimation, he's the least of the Bonds, because I don't really want the comedic, even though it's comforting. Right, he's the comforting Bond. He's the, like you said, the face value Bond. Right, that's what you get. I feel bad knocking him, but it's like, even though I'm not a fan of that, Pierce Brosnan didn't break any molds. He was just kind of keeping the franchise. I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts about that before we actually move on to talking about The Spy Who Loved Me? Andy, did you have anything to add to that, or disagree with? You can.
Well, again, you've got to think about these films like as time capsules, and the performances themselves reflect the times that they were made. Like it's one I said before, Roger Moore's portrayal of Bond, especially in this film, is what the public wanted and needed at that particular time.
Yeah.
If you think about Britain in the 1970s, not good times at all. Especially in like something like 77, like mid 70s, just pretty awful. So you needed, I mean, that's why that's why you get situations where that parachute sequence at the end of the opening titles that would get standing ovations at the time.
Yeah,
just for that, the lighter tone, even the patriotism.
Mm-hmm. It's a celebration, like Gareth said, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's what people wanted at that particular time. And The Spy Who Loved Me is this is the one that is that right place at the right time situation. So it's unfair to judge it by today's standards because it was being made for the audience of that particular time and what they wanted out of their films, and it really worked. And
I mean, this is like the 70s birth of like escapist entertainment as we know it today as well. Yeah. So
the same year as Star Wars. This movie came out that same year. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, for me, like this is in terms of the era of Bond, I would say Roger Moore, not my favorite Bond. It was always the one that I disliked the most growing up, but I've come to appreciate it now in retrospect for a whole host of reasons. And I would actually say that in terms of the whole Bond series, it's probably at its best, it's the purest fun Bond.
Yeah.
Like that's what it aimed to be, and that's what it is. It's less about story. It's less about it's less about character complexity, and that, although it does have a couple of moments where that matters, but it's most about like distilling purest fun, escapist entertainment for audiences. And I think that's why I would say at its best, but also at its worst, that's why Moonraker is still like enjoyable despite its many, many, many flaws. You know, it's so there isn't another era of Bond that's like that as well.
Yeah, and it had there's a certain level of rewatchability about them, because even though it's not my favorite Bond, they're not my favorite films per se on a quality level. They're actually probably the ones I watch the most, because if I'm having a bad day, or I'm tired, I don't want to be thinking about anything in particular, I can just put on any one of these and have a good time. And I
you good time girl, you.
They have a. I think they serve a very important function for me, as a film viewer, especially if I'm going back to they are very much like little comfort blankets.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm having a bad day, there's absolutely no way I'm putting a Daniel Craig film on.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's interesting, like how they function within the series. I think they would actually be probably more respected had things worked out differently regarding say the rival Bond film, because I think that is definitely instrumental in Moore's tenure being the length that it was.
Extended because of that,
He basically did 2 films more than he probably would have done had that not happened. He probably would have finished on Fewer Eyes Only, and I think his legacy at playing the character would be maybe slightly more intact and elevated, because I actually quite like Octopussy, and I think that's probably the film we should have finished on, because it was the victory in a way, because it did beat Never Say Never Again,
right?
And Views of a Kill was the victory lap, which he regretted doing like almost immediately after having done so. So but it's the other weird.
I mean, even he looks surprised that he's in that film throughout the entire.
Look, if you watch that film, if and within the context of Roger Moore's playing a character who thinks he's a super spy, but really isn't. It's a wonderful experience, especially with that Grace Jones bedroom sequence.
Oh boy, yeah.
But it's just
let Grandpa have his fun. It's okay.
I mean, that's the weird thing as well. Like I think I was talking about this with my wife last night when we were watching this, and it's that thing where people of the time looked way older than, I think Roger Moore was 49 when he made Spy Who Loved Me, and he could easily pass for like 59.
Yeah.
In today's standards. I mean, that's what smoking does to you, folks. But
he does have a face like the Grand Canyon, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
Like you can really, there are real peaks and troughs.
Well, you had the part where he's on the boat with Bach, and she was like, "Are you trying to seduce me?" And I was watching it, like you said, with my wife, and I was like, "Ugh." And Maya goes, "Ugh." I'm like, I don't know. Roger Moore always seemed like he started out really old. Like he started out old instead of like growing into. I don't know. It's just funny.
He was older than Sean Connery anyway.
Yeah.
So he started his tenure. Was it 11 years after Sean Connery started? So
right.
Yeah, I think Live and Let Die was 45.
Yeah. Okay. Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, that was the thing too.
45, like 70s, 45.
70s,
not even because Pierce Brosnan was 43 when he did GoldenEye.
Wow.
Like Pierce Brosnan and Roger Moore, pretty much the same age.
Yeah.
To their first films, and that's standards. Very different. But yeah, they do have a very important function within the series. But yeah, the weird thing for me is that The Spy Who Loved Me is probably one of Moore's films that I go back to the least.
Yeah.
Not because it's bad, but I think from what the elements that we were talking about it being a greatest hits package because it has a little bit of everything, I'd rather go for a film that's doing its own thing. Like,
Okay.
I'd probably, I'd watch Octopussy over The Spy Who Loved Me because it has more unique elements to it. Like the Indian setting and the circus elements of that film and its kind of weird cast of characters are more appealing to me on a rewatch than, say, The Spy Who Loved Me with. It's kind of like Blofeld, but not.
Yeah.
And then, all these things like the train sequence, which is kind of like From Russia with Love, but not quite as good.
Yeah.
To be honest, the real thing that's holding it together and one of the big draws for The Spy Who Loved Me that I think takes it from being a bad Formula Bond movie to being a good Formula Bond movie, is its kind of ballsy production values, but also that character of Jaws. Because he is the one real unique element, that calling card for this film, that sort of makes the whole thing work. Because I think if you take Jaws out of this film, definitely a lesser film, even with like the really nice set. Because I think he's the extra added ingredient, I think, that makes the film feel like it's a classic element in this film, I think. So,
I don't know. I'd say with the iron in his diet, though, he must have an arsehole made of steel.
Yeah.
You see him bite a lot of chains and,
oh my gosh,
and all sorts, and he never spits anything out.
No, gotta hurt coming out.
It goes down.
Well, Andy, you talking about that?
Saying that you should have roughage in your diet.
Yeah, should. Not that. That's a little bit. Andy, you talking about that perspective of not having it, greatest hits. That's what I want to hear from people. That's what I want to hear from podcasts. It's kind of a different way of approaching it. And we're all going to have movies are subjective. Opinions are subjective. We're all going to have different ideas of what Bond is. Some people think that Roger Moore is Bond and the serious kind of disillusioned Bond is not Bond. Like, everybody's going to have different ideals of what that is, right? So just to kind of give my general thoughts on The Spy Who Loved Me, and then Gareth, since Andy's given his, I want to get your opinion. But like I said, I'm not really big on Roger Moore. He's a goofball. Like, he bugs his eyes out. It's got the slide whistle part for Man with the Golden Gun. It's got J.W. Pepper, who's probably my least favorite character in the whole franchise, and even shows up in Superman 2, which I think kind of bogs that one down. But you're right. You approach Roger Moore of a different, that's what people wanted. It's also the comfort movies. When you say you want to put it on as a kind of a blanket comfort movie, I agree with that. You brought up Star Trek before, Gareth. Star Trek Insurrection, that's nobody's favorite Star Trek, but that's the one that I watch the most because it's just the cast having fun with each other and hanging out. And I can just have it on. I don't have to invest myself. After a rough day, I don't want to sit down and have to process things. I just want to have something wash over me and be fun. So that's kind of how I approach that. But as far as The Spy Who Loved Me goes, I think Roger Moore has his place. I think there's the goofier elements. One of the notes I have, when he's fighting the, I can't remember his name, the bald guy where he knocks him off the roof, right? And he kind of hits his tie off. Or you're looking at For Your Eyes Only when he kicks the guy off the side of the cliff. Moore has these moments of just plain brutalness that I think he plays very, very well. Yeah. But when he's fighting people and he's kicking people, I don't find him a danger at all. There's kind of a difference there, right? But he does have I think close-up it works. So I think The Spy Who Loved Me is the one where it has the silliness and the grittiness that really just melds together. And when you want to put that in context, just look at Jaws. He's terrifying, man. He's horrifying. The way that he bites people's necks, he's a terrifying character, but he's also silly as shit. You know what I mean? He's so silly. Yeah. And the scenes are treated as comedy, which is fine because I think it works because what I'm saying is you look at Jaws has the perfect balance of silliness and menace. And I think that's what makes The Spy Who Loved Me work. In the Moonraker, it's funny that they turn him in. They have the Romeo and Juliet when he's running towards the girl. Like you said in your Moonraker episode, it's like, why would you want to have this biting steel teeth guy, why would you want to give him a redemptive arc, right? It's like with all the characters. So they kind of
way beyond that.
Yeah, they lessen him and they trivialize him in Moonraker, which, again, one of the problems of that movie. But I just think that The Spy Who Loved Me is a mix of the glamour, a mix of the excitement, the car chase where they're being chased by the helicopter. One of the notes I have is like, thank heaven for practical stunts. Like when the helicopter spins and I'm like, whoa! Like you're used to CGI stuff. When you see the Lotus, which is my favorite Bond car, just because I had the model when I was a kid. It's a Transformer too, so I think that's great. But when you see the Lotus jump off that pier, that's a cool shot. You know what I mean? So I think The Spy Who Loved Me just has that goofy, but also menace. I think it's just a good melding of both what I want from Bond and what people want from Bond. So I think that's why Spy Who Loved Me really works. And I just got to say, the part of the end, it's goofy, but when he attaches Jaws' teeth to like the metal, the what's the word I'm looking for? The
electromagnet,
right? And he smiles at him to get Jaws. I wrote in my notes, I think that's my favorite thing that Moore has ever done. Again, it's the mix of the silly and just the grandeur, and that's why Spy Who Loved Me is my favorite of his movies. Even though I like For Your Eyes Only, I like Octopussy. Spy Who Loved Me just does it for me. But Gareth, what are your general thoughts on The Spy Who Loved Me?
I would say that it's smack bang in the middle in terms of looking at the more tenure for Bond for me. It's right there in the middle. It's not my favorite, but it's certainly not my least. And I really appreciate things about it, such as like I think it's one of the stronger films of that period as well in terms of the cinematography. I think it's really, really well shot and really nice looking. And as you say, bringing the big sets back and that kind of thing. The production design all speaks to me on that level. I really appreciate that. For me, I think though the thing that where it falters is that it's particularly in relation to the villain and his plot and his absence as well.
Yeah.
For a large portion of film, it is Jaws who is a representation of our villain. But because he's mute as well, he's just a physical presence for Bond to go up against time after time. And he has his moments that he's, as you say, truly terrifying. Silly, but truly terrifying. I think it's because of that, the overarching villain of the film. I mean, he disappears into the second hour of the film. I think he has one scene at the very beginning, which is a great introduction, and then he's gone until the second hour of the film. And I think that's what hampers it for me, is that it feels like Bond is a little untethered, and he's just kind of breezing through set piece and location for a while. It feels a bit aimless, I would say. But once it gets going as well, and the action starts to come part of it as well, I do start to appreciate it. I would also say as well, I think this is particularly what because the fan base, I would say, it's such a diverse fan base, and everybody wants something different from the series. And there is a particular set of the fan base that when they look at this film, and I would say it has the lines like, women drivers and, Egyptian builders and all that, all in the same scene. But it has those moments, and it also makes me think like, oh, that particularly as well, that kind of bit of dirty history, which I think is important, that's still a part of the films as well. Like, we haven't edited them out or anything. They need to be presented as they were. But I think that is what some fans will want to get back to as well, a certain fan base. And I can't help but have that colour my opinion as well when it comes to it. But I do still appreciate this film. Like I say, it's a lot. It is fun. I would still have no problem like watching it with my kids as well. Much in the same way that I grew up with. But for me, I would say like For Your Eyes Only is the more Bond film that speaks to me on a larger level. I mean, I kind of, for all of the ending, all of the big production design, the big Bond moments that this has in its ending, I still really appreciate the climbing up the cliff face in For Your Eyes Only. Like that's and feels much smaller but much more personal as a result.
It's Hitchcockian too. It's got a Hitchcock kind of
exactly, yeah. And a huge Hitchcock fan, so that's exactly why that speaks to me as well. So yeah, I mean, I like it, but it's not my favorite. It's not my least favorite. It's not my favorite though.
Okay. Well, Andy, that's an interesting question. How does this rank with the Moore movies for you?
It's probably like, it's like maybe the middle, or it's probably right bang smack in the middle. I'd probably put Moonraker, A View to a Kill, and Live and Let Die below it.
Okay.
I don't know in what order, but yeah, I tend to gravitate towards Golden Gun, Pure Eyes Only, and Octopussy more.
Okay.
No pun intended there. Yeah, it's right bang smack in the middle because what it's doing is fine. That's there's nothing really really wrong with the film, but outside of Jaws and the cool set, it's, I don't know, it's just not what I'm looking for in a Bond film.
Okay.
I think. Again, it's a good formula film, but it's interesting when people talk about the Bond formula anyway, because that's kind of a myth in of itself. If you look at classic formula Bond film like Goldfinger, we've talked about this before because we've always been edging to do a Goldfinger episode, but classic Goldfinger lacks so many of the elements that are supposedly in the Bond formula. Like, it has next to no action sequences. It doesn't have any exotic locations. The list goes on. There's no real tension between Bond and the villain apart from maybe one scene, which is the laser scene. Like the golf sequence completely deflates. Bond best Goldfinger in within the first 10 minutes of the film, and then also spends the rest of the film incarcerated for stretches. So, there's not really many Bond films that actually have all of the elements of this supposed formula. They all usually lack something. So it's more about, what do you want from the character? Because Roger Moore's portrayal by its very nature is a very passive version of the character. Things generally happen to him. He doesn't really do any detective work. That part of the film is very, very lax. That whole part of his tenure is quite flimsy. So it's more about what are the other elements. So it really banks on what are the other things surrounding Moore that you actually like. And if you're I do have a soft spot for Pure Eyes Only because it has way more Fleming in it. It's literally adapting two of his short stories. And to be honest, it's got two of his short stories and loads of elements from Live and Let Die. Like, it's always the running joke that Live and Let Die, the film, has virtually no Live and Let Die, the book, whereas License to Kill and Pure Eyes Only have a lot more of it in there. So it's more about what's grinding your gears. And because, again, with Spy Who Loved Me, so much of it is recycled elements from earlier films. You've just got to weigh it up, really, because the only really fresh parts of this film are Jaws and probably the opening title sequence, because everything else is business as usual. I think the only exception maybe would be the Triple X thing, but I don't think they do enough with it.
Or maybe Bach isn't strong enough to kind of carry that as well, right? As an actress. Okay. Okay. Well,
that reveal though, I really.
Oh yeah,
I mean that opening reveal is probably my favorite little moment of the film. with her lay in bed where who you expect to be the Russian version of Bond.
We're flipping gender expectations on their heads, right? Because of that.
Exactly, yeah.
I think that's even more effective because the actor that they got to play that character, Michael Billington, was once upon a time, if they couldn't have got Roger Moore to do Live and Let Die, he would have been James Bond for Live and Let Die.
Okay.
So that was kind of his compensation to play that bait and switch character.
Right.
So you can be a version of James Bond for a minute on screen. So it would have been that would have been an interesting what if, because there's so many what if Bond actors. You've got
Sam Neill,
John Gavin, Sam Neill, James Brolin.
James Brolin,
it all came very, very close to playing James Bond. I imagine we'll add Henry Cavill to that list at some point. We'll see what's going on with that. I very much doubt it at this point, though. But yeah, I think everything else is executed quite well, but I don't know, just lacking that extra something for me to keep me coming back time and time again. But at the same time, I can appreciate why it was made in this way, because it wasn't really fulfilling a function that we particularly need right now. It was it was fulfilling a function that was needed at the time. Which is why, again, Bond films are so interesting, whether you like some of them or hate some of them or are indifferent. They 9 times out of 10 fulfill a purpose. There are a couple of wild cards in there where you go, what were they thinking? This doesn't even match up with the times. Like really weird. I mean, I'd say Spectre is one of those. Dino is one of those. Diamonds is probably one of those as well. I'd say they're probably the 3 wildest cards in the whole series. Because even Moonraker makes sense in the context of when it was made.
Because of Star Wars, right? Yeah.
Because of Star Wars, yeah. And also, again, it's basically a remake of this film. So this film did amazing. I mean, just to read you the numbers. So this film was made for $13.5 million, which is about 70 million in today's money. Box office was 185.4, which is about 940 million in today's money. So 940 million from a 70 million budget is very good. Thank you very again, by today's standards, that's amazing. Really, really strong.
I would say as well that this is the The Spy Who Loved Me is the quintessential Roger Moore film from when we were growing up as well. This is the one that certainly my parents would refer to as the Roger Moore film. And I guess it comes back to that idea of it, as you say, Darren, it's bringing together a lot of elements from previous films and having that kind of celebration of the Bond series. But there's also an element from my perspective as well that when I was growing up, this film kind of represented, because I didn't like Roger Moore when I was growing up, this film represented what I didn't like about Bond, what I thought I didn't like. Now I'm absolutely fine with it. And I would still say, I would have no issue if this is on TV, which Bond films are on TV often over here. I have no problem putting on any of the Roger Moore films now. As soon as they're on my telly, if I see them, and this is certainly one of them as well.
Yeah. Well, it's you guys. What you're talking about, it's all subjective. We're all attacking or coming to this movie from different points of view or different ways of life. That's what I say. When I want a review of something, I don't want just you recapping what the plot is, right? I want to know how you came to form this opinion of this movie to get you to this point. That's why I can't flat out hate a critic as long as they give me an insight into how they are thinking about a movie, right? Pauline Kael, I don't agree with her 80%, 90% of the time, right? Roger Ebert has his down moments, but but I know them. I want to read them because I understand where and they help me be a better critic as far as a voice, as far as where personal stuff comes from. So what you guys are talking about with these them ranking in the middle for you. That's because that's where life has geared you to. Andy and Gareth, you both have said that it's what you don't really want from Bond, or it is what you want from Bond, and it kind of slots into that, which is what we're talking about, and why, again, Popcorn Digest is great, and and all this stuff, and why I think you guys are so great. So,
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I can't, because you guys have attacked it from a certain point of view, I can't disagree with you, because that's your opinion, right? And that's, I think, what we need more of in conversations. And we could go forever, and we could go through and talk about each Bond film and how we feel about it, but it's like, I think this gives us kind of a general view of how we look at the series and what we kind of expect from it. So, as for kind of a final topic, I think that kind of sums it up for Spy Who Loved Me, but now that Bond is dead, right? Literally and figuratively. It's like, where do you guys think James Bond should go from? We've seen Connery, the 60s. We've seen more with the 70s stuff. We've seen Dalton, kind of the gritty 80s. We've seen Brosnan with kind of the silly 90s spectacle. And now we've seen Craig, which is like, oh, we need more investment in the plots and these characters. We need to have kind of an interesting viewpoint. Where do you think the Bond movie should go from here? What would you like to see in future iterations? Andy, if you wanted to go first.
I think they need to strike a good balance between having something that's hard hitting and breezy at the same time. So I think, I think the Brosnan films tried and really failed at doing it, but I think but I think that was part of because of the way that the films were made, because they weren't really made with any kind of vision. They definitely attempted it, and I think the person who got closest to that was probably Martin Campbell. He was probably the only director out of those that really had a vision for the character. I mean, to be honest, if you look at the production of those films, it's a bit of a mess anyway. I mean, that's not new to Eon. I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the way like Barbara Broccoli handles the films, because I feel like the production of the films has been a lot more chaotic under her watch and much less consistent. Because like her highs are really high and her lows are quite low or very like dull. Like she's made a lot of dull Bond films, which is interesting. I mean, that's the worst crime a Bond film can be, is to be dull. You can have a so bad it's good film, or or a really strong film, but if it's dull, then no thanks.
Right. It's hard to process movies because we can attack great movies, we can attack bad movies, but where do you fall on movies that don't do anything?
Yeah. That's the worst crime of all.
Yeah.
But yeah, something that's, I think, definitely needs to be less dour. And again, I think they really need to get away from exploring Bond's roots, because that kind of stuff really annoyed me. Because I think the beauty of Bond, even on the page, is very little about him beyond the point that he's actually in the situation that he's in. Loads about him in terms of how he reacts to things, but nothing about you have no context as to why he's that way, which I think is one of the things that makes him interesting, which is why I never got on with all the stuff they tried to do in Spectre particularly, because it just felt very cheap. And I think we've talked about it before. Trying to make Bond the center of this universe makes the universe really small.
And also,
getting away from all that, definitely.
I would say as well, Spectre has that element of much like Batman vs Superman, where they managed to ruin the death of Superman, which is something that you can only do really once for a series and it be shocking. Yep. I think Spectre kind of managed in one fell swoop to ruin the idea of Bond having or exploring Bond's roots, but also Blofeld as well, something that should have been a surefire hit. Kind of just spoilt that for the future. Next time Blofeld is back in the series, and he will be back in the series, it might be in the next film or a couple of films down the line, it won't have that same kind of event feeling, that same pomp and circumstance surrounding it. It will just be the villain.
Yeah.
So I think to do that in such a dull way, I think is unforgivable.
Yeah.
Right.
I think the other thing as well, I would again maybe try and get away from doing the arcs, because one, I don't think they did them particularly well, and two, having that level of continuity, that kind of MCU style continuity. One of the big things, and I repeat this many times in comment sections and stuff, is like one of the big things as to why the Bond films have lasted so long is because they are those little time capsules, and they are able to, for better or worse, chop and change with the times. Whereas if you've got a rigid tone and a set of continuity sort of parameters, it's very difficult to change tack if something's not working with a particular film. Like again, you would not be able to do, say, a Die Another Day to Casino Royale, for example. It gives, like, if you look at the Craig films, they're a bit more uniform, but I think that makes his tenure as a whole maybe a little less exciting than others.
Yeah. You kind of roping yourself in when you do something like that.
Yeah, you're really hemming yourself in. And again, if something doesn't work, like for example Blofeld, you are stuck with it. Whereas back in the day, if a Blofeld didn't work, just recast him.
Yeah.
You know, it's because I constantly argue with people who are very like continuity fixated because of things like the MCU. Bond was so fluid in that way, and that's one of its superpowers, is that it could do whatever the hell it wanted to reflect the times that it was made in. Whereas if you tied the series down in those ways, it's going to struggle to continue. And I think this is which is why they're probably struggling right now into trying to come up with an angle, because of Craig's tenure. I think that's really kind of recontextualize their thinking for maybe not for the better. So I think I genuinely feel they actually are struggling right now to actually work out what they actually want to do. Which is bizarre considering the circumstances of that they're in one of the most solid positions they've ever been in, from a studio point of view, because them being tied to MGM for so many years, and MGM being on the verge of bankruptcy or whatever's going on. I mean, you know, we had a whole era of Timothy Dalton scuppered because of MGM's issues. And again, we had delays with Skyfall and some of the other films because of MGM. And now we're in a really stable position of them being part of Amazon, and there's nothing going on, really. All we've had is a really...
What, are you telling me you're not looking forward to 007 Road to a Million Season 2?
Yeah, it's a really... I get it. It's a really...
Paul Brian Cox, he was in that, and he thought he was going to be in an actual James Bond.
Nope.
But yeah, it's a really strange time to be a Bond fan, because although I didn't dislike the ending of No Time to Die, as say some people did, you know, Fleming himself tried to do it several times.
Right.
So
Arthur Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes, for crying out loud.
But it still leaves a kind of awkward taste in my mouth just because of what they're not doing with it. Really, I think they should have had something solid
in place
to say, "Hey, everything's okay." I think also, unfortunately for them, I think it was a brave move to do, but it was very bad timing, because again, the film was delayed a long time. I think people really wanted a win, and the film is a bit of a downer. And I think that's not worked in its favor as time goes on, because you've got this diverse film and nothing's going on, and it just feels it's very just really weird. really weird. I can't think of another time. Maybe the only comparative is after License to Kill and before GoldenEye, but even then, that was for more outside reasons than anything going on within Eon.
I would say that we're in a similar place, and I say this as somebody who still really, really enjoys No Time to Die and really appreciated where it ended and the finality of that, knowing that they would still be doing something completely different with the next one. But I would say that we're almost in a Die Another Day to Casino Royale situation where the world has changed in between films.
Yeah.
With that film, it was 9/11 happened. Action films changed. The film landscape changed in general, and what people wanted from films changed. We are in a similar situation where the world has changed in between when No Time to Die was made, which was pre-COVID essentially, and now we're in a post-COVID world, and our wants and desires are completely different than what they were before.
Yeah.
I mean, that one had the unfortunate thing as well of having a virus subplot at a time. And it was just completely coincidental, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as far as that goes, Gareth, I mean, where do you think it should go? Or what would you like to see from the next iteration of Bond?
I would. There's obviously a desire there for them to. We've done the kind of the gritty aspects of the film. I think Craig's has done that really well, and also had a few moments where it's been done badly. But we've had that very kind of visceral Bond, a violent Bond, an angry Bond. And I do think Craig's tenure has been very enjoyable at its peak. I really like Casino Royale, I really like Skyfall, and I really like No Time to Die.
Peaks and valleys there, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In between, they're not so great. But as for where I stand now, I know that there's a lot of speculation surrounding Christopher Nolan and him having a take on Bond, and perhaps it's something he's going to take on next. And I would like to see an auteur filmmaker come in and make a Bond film that has an auteur stamp on it, especially if it's one that, like, for example, me and Andy were speaking about this just the other day, if they were coming with the intention of, much like he did with The Dark Knight, making a 3-film, like, trilogy, not necessarily connected, but having the sense of, like, same world changing over and having that kind of auteur vision throughout. I'd be very interested in that. I think it's something that the series has never quite had. Even though it's had returning filmmakers, it's never had that kind of auteur drive. It's always been, as we mentioned, a family-driven, a community-driven film series. I say a producer-driven, really, when we think of the Broccoli's.
Yeah.
So I'd be very interested in that. But in terms of the tone, it's going to be difficult to set it apart from what Mission Impossible is doing, because Mission Impossible is essentially at a point now where it's providing the audience like a certain section of that Bond fan base with an example of what Bond could have been had it embraced the kind of funner elements of the series.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, I would be interested in I wouldn't say I'm gonna say, oh, this is the tone that I want. I want it to be fun. I want it to have this. I want it to have the gadgets. I want it to have the big sets. Of course, I want it to have those things. But I would like any filmmaker with a vision to come in and give it a stamp, because we're at a point now where the world is your oyster. It could go anywhere. So yeah, I'm unsure, but I'd be happy to see where it goes.
Right. Well, as far as I'll try to keep this brief, because like I said, we could talk about this all day, right? I think it would be interesting because, especially in light of them rewriting the Fleming books to take a lot of the racist stuff out, like I I don't agree with any of that. Like, sure, it's uncomfortable, but it's like, but you're closing the door on a conversation that you could have, right? You could talk about why these things are outmoded instead of just cutting them out. I think that's lazy and it's cheap, right? It's just that you're sidestepping an argument or a conversation or something to make us all better to have that talk. So all that stuff. But I think like if they were to do something like a period piece, which they've been talking about, I think going back and showing Bond from the 60s, like lean into the sexism, lean into all that so we can look at it. And I know it's dangerous in today's atmosphere, right? But lean into that stuff so we can see what the difference is between now and then. And it might give a different kind of visual aesthetic. I think that might be fun.
Might even provide like a critical view of Bond in that way. Yeah.
You could do that. I think Griffin Newman had a conversation with Patrick Williams about, isn't it interesting when you take a filmmaker that comes in and doesn't just continue a franchise, but he's like, this is what I want to say. I want to use this character to say something, right? And you could do that with a period piece. You could do that with all. So again, with just giving my 2 cents on the Craig stuff, I like that they approach it because I think that's, Andy, what you talked about, that's what audiences needed. You look at the plot of Spy Who Loved Me and it doesn't really matter. You just want the little pieces of the action bits or the sex stuff or stuff like that. But now audiences, they demand a little bit more. They want more connective tissue. They want more emotionality, which I think is what's great about Casino Royale. Quantum of Solace is a weird kind of third act to the 2 acts of Casino Royale. And so it's kind of like a take it or leave it movie. It's so light and you can just dump it. You don't have to deal with it. Skyfall, I thought, was a great conclusion to that. Here we've been building a Bond at the end of that Bond, because I'm forgetting the name of the ships, but the visual storytelling of Skyfall, it has a painting that Bond and Q or when they're in the museum, it's a painting of a ship, I think the Temeraire or something like that, where it shows the ship in focus, like as this tattered kind of boat that's past its prime, which is commenting on what Bond is. But then in the end, when Bond goes into M's office, you have another painting, which is a different painting, but in the background, you have the Temeraire. I hope I'm getting it, but you have that same ship, but now it's at full battle stance. It's in its prime. And so that's where the movie ends. Glory. Visually, I thought Skyfall was telling the story. It was like, whoa, I don't know of another Bond movie that's telling this visually. But at the end of Skyfall, it's concluded his arc. He's Bond now. He's ready to go to work. And then Spectre, they walk it back so there's more? Like you're doing more of that? Why? What? We're right there. Now we can you've done your character building. Now we can go and we can have the fun Bond, which I think is what my favorite stuff in No Time to Die is during the Ana de Armas sequence. That's so fun. It's so fun, and Craig seems to be having a blast, and you're like, this is what we could have had with Spectre. You could have had a movie in between that was so fun, and now you can go and you can do the No Time to Die, where I think the second half is interesting because Leiter dies, Spectre is destroyed, so you're kind of destroying Bond's legacy, so you can get him to that point that he gets to at the end. But I don't know, I just think the reason Spectre does it, I hate that movie and the experience of watching it is it's after Skyfall, you have the same team to make something so good and then something so vapid and something so misguided. I don't understand how you can have the same people do that. Even Moonraker is kind of a continuation of The Spy Who Loved Me instead of a walking back. I don't know. I just think you've done that. Let's not worry about building Bond. Let's go back. Let's have some fun with it instead of doing I don't want the nitty gritty. We've seen that. Let's do something different, which is, again, we got that with Sean Connery moving into Roger Moore. We got too much of the goofy. We moved into Timothy Dalton. We got too much of the serious. We moved into the goofy with Brosnan. So there's, it's all the like we talked about, the peaks and valleys. I think that's where I would like to see the Bond series go.
I would say as well that The Spy Who Loves Me has The Spy Who Loved Me had a moment that reminded me of that specific reference to, as you say, the painting of the ship being brought into dock and then going back out to war. And that is there's a great shot earlier on, and this is what I was speaking about earlier with regards to the cinematography. There's a moment where Bond is talking to M while they're walking down a dock, and Bond is framed against what could possibly be like Trident. It's a nuclear sub in the background, and it's kind of tracking him and keeping him framed at that side of the shot. And it's this idea that it presents Bond as being the cutting edge of British weaponry, the strongest tool that we have at our expense. And there are moments in Spy Who Loved Me where it has like that kind of visual storytelling that, I'd love to see more of. Essentially, back in the series as well. Also, I would like another film in which the villain is killed by getting shot in the dick twice.
Even my son walked in on that and saw Stromberg get hit. He's like, "Ooh!" I'm like, "Yeah,
He got both of them.
way to go." Which I thought was kind of poetic justice, because I laughed that when Stromberg kidnaps Anya, he dresses her in that outfit, and I was like, "Why? He's just as much of a pervert as Bond is. Like he dresses her. Why did he dress her in that?" So when he gets shot in the dick, it's like, yeah, you kind of deserve that, which was funny. But yeah, so again, this is Andy. Do you have anything else you wanted to add to that? Since
Yeah, I mean,
before we close out,
you mentioned that whole sequence in the Navy dock, because that's something what if you're gonna go into another element of Bond, like an earlier element of Bond, which I feel has been very untapped, is that whole element of the fact that he
Commander
was
Bond.
a commander Bond, like a naval commander. I've never really done anything with that. So yeah, there's so much you can do, and again, even when we talked about it in our Spectre show, like that whole movie's gestation just absolutely baffles me. It genuinely disturbs me how wrong they got that, considering the script they had originally was fine. Like they just kept making it worse and worse and worse, like to the point where the film it's there's nothing there. There's no plot, nothing, absolutely nothing. It's a waste of, you may as well just burn $300 million.
Some of the most interesting stuff happens like off screen, in between scenes. So frustrating.
Yeah, and again, this is where I'm like, I get nervous with the way they've been handling the films recently, because it just doesn't feel. I've never got the sense from Barbara or Michael that they're really confident in what they're doing. Always seems so unsure of themselves, considering the fact that they've been doing this since the 70s and the 80s. They don't seem to know what they want to do, which I find
they
really
seem very
odd.
begrudging as well about the series.
Yeah.
It's almost like we spoke about this on our show as well. Like there's an element now where when people ask them about Bond, which again is a question that's asked a lot, but they are essentially the caretakers of the series.
yeah,
And there's an element now where it's like they're begrudgingly answering to the fans this whole idea of where's Bond up to, and they're giving off answers that are like almost serving to bring down an audience rather than build them up. And for me, I would like to have people, as we mentioned earlier, that have a sense of celebration about the series, or have something new to say with the series, or somewhere like an idea of where to take it. I don't get that from them. But at the same time, they have had moments where they've brought in filmmakers that have filled that and taken it and in certain directions. But yeah. So yeah, I'd say I'd just like a little bit more celebration from them.
yeah.
Passion. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Well, that's the exciting thing. We hope that they can do these things. So having to wait so long is kind of it's been more of a downer every day that they don't announce another Bond movie. Like, I need to know what direction you guys are going in, instead of like, we can't end it like that. That was fine. That was for what it was, but we need something. So give it to us, guys. So, but yeah, I mean, again, there's no other people that I wanted to bring on to talk about a Bond movie. I could have talked about this, by myself or with Johnny or anything, but like I need this other perspective, especially the British perspective. You know what I mean? Like, or different perspectives is what we need. And again, I really appreciate the conversations we're able to have all these different facets to talking about a character that's been around since not just the 50s, 60s in film form, but the 50s in character form, right? We need to have these conversations, and having you guys on.
I will say, sorry, as one last thing for The Spy Who Loved Me, it does feature one of my favorite tropes in all of films that visit the Middle East, and that is the moment that we get an establishing shot of I think it's Egypt, we get an establishing shot. I can't remember where it is, if it's Cairo. We do get like a man yelling in the distance, Allahu Akbar. And it made me think, like, is this the same audio clip that they use over and over again? Is this like a Middle Eastern Wilhelm scream?
Yeah.
Could it be? Because it's such a well-worn trope.
Yeah, you just have to. Maybe that's just. I haven't been to Egypt. Maybe that's what we just hear. I don't know.
To be fair, you do in Egypt. Like I did a Nile cruise once, and I remember getting woken up at God knows what time in the morning, and they must all have the same tannoy system. Because it's loud, really loud, and again, it has that real tinny quality to it. So maybe it's just that thing where it just. Again, part of the furniture in that that region. It's it's a cliche because it genuinely is a common feature.
It's like kilts on Scottish people, even if it wasn't appropriate at the time. It still helps us accumulate.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically it's. I suppose it's our equivalent over here is probably church bells on a Sunday.
Yes. Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Which is probably not. I don't think that's probably as common in the States.
Or London Calling. You guys, that's the only song you guys listen to, right?
Of course we do. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
and sorry. And my last note is that I love that Bond gets given the line. I often do this, right? I often write responses to characters in the film in my notes. And I've written one down here where somebody says, "You're sensitive, Mr. Bond." And I've written, well, if your penis was ground zero for 90% of the world's STDs, you'd be sensitive as well. So that is the quote I would like to end my contribution on.
Well, there's that Popcorn Digest flavor that I always look forward to. Well, guys, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for putting this together so fast. Andy, thank you for being open to Gareth kind of roping you in.
That was fine.
I say this again and again. Well. Yeah, if it weren't for you guys, I wouldn't be here. Like, I know we have a fan base, but if it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't have that fan base, even though it might be small. I don't know how big it is. You know what I mean? But it's like all your insights, the way that you guys are just like brothers. And I told this to Gareth, Andy, during our Forrest Gump episode. You guys, you don't talk about how your education as far as film education goes because you have kind of the English kind of humility in you, right? But the way that you guys talk, you put to shame most professional critics. I hope you guys know that. It's just such a great listen, and you guys have such great ideas that you can talk about Star Trek V and Superman 4 and still have me walk away thinking, having a respect for those movies and how they were made. That's something that should be heralded, and you guys should be proud of that. So I'm so very grateful to be able to talk to, again, my heroes and have you again on this podcast. So if you guys wanted to tell us like what's in the future and how we can find you, I know that I was like, I wish I had Andy's phone number or something because I can't reach him on Twitter. I can't reach him on Facebook. But like, how can we, are there any ideas, any upcoming, I know we talked about like episodes and kind of in the backlog.
There are episodes and there are videos that are being worked on. I'm currently in a position, I'm actually broadcasting from my brand new external office.
I see that.
Separate from my house, and this has just been built. So the reason why I haven't been near my computer is because I've had all this being done, so I've not been able to edit. But I'm currently in the middle of renovating some certain parts of my house. But I am planning on getting back to editing, getting some videos out there. I've got ideas for episodes that I really want to get out there. But I also don't want it to be something that happens like once every blue moon.
Yeah.
I want it to be a structure to it. So it may be a couple of months, but there will be more information coming out there. It will be in a shorter format, like in a video format on YouTube, but there will be more content. I've used that word, content.
Oh, no.
There will be more from us in the future. It's certainly not the end of Popcorn Digest for the moment. We're just taking a break.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, it's just getting it together.
Right.
It's we both got families.
Yeah. Do you have any composing gigs or anything coming up, Andy? Anything like that?
Not really at the moment. I'm actually writing a novel at the moment. So
oh, okay.
It's,
wow.
slightly different. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the composing thing is
Twilight fan fiction. It is.
It's
kind of,
50 Shades of Grey, right?
60 Shades of Grey.
I mean, yeah, it's more in the realm of record production at the moment, but yeah, it's all a bit wishy-washy. So yeah, the novel's the most solid thing I've got going on at the moment, at least.
Yeah, it's very good as well. He's allowed me to take a peek, and I liked what I saw.
All right. Well, if it's coming from Andy, we would figure it's got to be good, right?
Yeah.
Again, guys, it's been a pleasure. Like Bond, we need more Popcorn Digest. So yeah, I really appreciate it. Look forward to if we're able to put this together so fast. I'd love to have you guys on again pretty soon here, so we can have another great conversation. Okay.
I'd love to be back. I've always enjoyed it here.
Okay, great. Andy, great to see you. Great to have you on. I appreciate it.
Cheers. No, it was great.
Okay, we'll talk to you guys again soon. Okay, awesome. How long was that? Was that 4 hours? Not quite 4 hours.
No, bang on 2 hours is what I've recorded.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just going to save it immediately.
In a way, I'm glad. I don't, like I said before, I'm kind of, that Johnny's not here. It kind of helps keep the episode from being 4 or 5 hours long. We have so much insight that it's like, we don't usually do 2 guests a lot of the time. And the last time we had 2 guests, it was for Close Encounters, and it was like, it went on a really long time, which is fun as a conversation. But when you try to listen to it in an audio form, it's like, oh, I got to cut some of this out because it's like
that's the balance. That's the balance that's hard to find,
Yeah. So again, I say that because Johnny's wife is going to be editing this, and so he's saying this right now. But it's like, yeah, I love this conversation, but sometimes it's hard because you have so much that you want to say that it's hard to do that within like a small amount of time. So Johnny and I will be able to talk about this movie a little bit later. We'll have kind of an intro and outro of this episode, but I think we're going to aim for this episode to be out next week. If I can get it edited, I don't think I'm going to cut out a lot of stuff.
Great.
So just so you guys know, but yeah, Andy, I know you're busy. I know you got family stuff, and so I really love that you were able to jump on for this, and that Gareth is able to.
I mean, to be honest, any opportunity to talk about James Bond is,
Yeah. Well, if we go back to 90s, I do want to talk about GoldenEye, because that was the first Bond movie that was mine. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah. Like, I made the decision I got excited about it. I made the decision to go watch it in the theater. So if we talk about GoldenEye, I definitely want to have you guys back for that one.
Oh, I'd love to come back for that.
Okay, perfect.
And talking about that Eric Serra score.
Oh my gosh.
We have it's one of my favorite scores.
Yeah. It's a fun score. I just think it's funny that they had to jettison what he had for the tanker chase, the tank chase, right? They had some other guy come in and write score that scene.
Was it David Arnold that they brought in at last minute for that?
John Altman. So he
John
was arranging the strings and conducting the strings for Eric's score, and they basically at the last minute decided to ditch that cue and go, okay, you can write music, like you've got it, you know what you're doing, do it. Literally did it in like a day. And recorded it like the next day. He said it was the kiss of death because they told him, "Oh, you really saved our movie," which he says apparently in the industry is like, "Yeah, you're not." Yeah, it was cool, but you're not coming back, sort of thing. Which is, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Kind of a shame, really. But yeah, like that whole thing is a complete mess anyway, because I guess that whole temp track nightmare situation where they used his Leon score all over the temp track.
Right.
So that's why that's why those 2 scores sound so similar to each other.
Yeah, he cops a lot of flack for that, but when it comes to it, it's not really his fault.
No, there's so many crossovers as well. Like the song that's at the end of GoldenEye is based off like the actual guitar riff is there's a cue in Leon which is the same riff, and I think the song was originally meant for the end of Leon.
Oh,
but because we went with Shape of My Heart with the Sting song at the end of Leon, that ended up because I think Eric Serra had always done the end song for any of Luc Besson's films previous, and and that tradition continued after after that film. But yeah, that's why there's the weird. I mean, I actually quite like that song, but that's why that song is at the end of GoldenEye, because it was like an unused song that he wanted to just use.
Yeah.
It's a really weird. It's probably the messiest part of that film is the soundtrack. But yeah, it's just I quite like it. But
Yeah, I really like bits and pieces of that score too.
it lends the film. I think that's why it's probably the strongest Brosnan film, because it lends it a kind of a melancholy edge that I think you needed to give the character.
Yeah, I think you said that.
Yeah, it kind of beefs up Brosnan's performance.
Yeah, what's not on the yeah.
I mean, again, we could talk about World Is Not Enough Till the Cows Come Home, couldn't we? Guys? Like, that's definitely right at the bottom of my list.
Well, I know it's late over there, but I wanted to ask you a couple of Bond-related questions. Like, World Is Not Enough, I think it's my least favorite Brosnan. And it's not because it doesn't try stuff. It's because, and I know people love that first opening sequence with the boat chase, but I just think it's so ineptly directed. Like the part where you see the boat dive under, there's not even a money shot. They have like 3 or 4 cuts to kind of give you the idea that the boat sinks underwater. And then it has, he straightens his tie. But then again, it's another 2 cuts to show him pop back up. It's like, oh, like you missed something there. Or the part where you hear the boat explode off screen before he jumps on the balloon. Because I guess they didn't have, I don't know. I just think that the action in that one is very ineptly done, which is strange because the action should be the bread and butter of the Bond films, because it's not the director doing it. I don't know. What did you guys? Am I wrong thinking that?
Oh no, God no! Yeah, absolutely bang on the money. It's I'd say there's nothing in the film that really speaks to me or sings on any level, really. Even some of the worst Bond films, even some of the ones that you say are so terrible, have their moments. Even if it's like we often say this, Die Another Day that came next is often regarded as being Pierce Brosnan's worst film, but it takes a swing at something very, very silly. And it's still got a passion and drive. Yeah, it's still got a passion and drive behind it. There's nothing really behind it.
World Is Not. It's so dull. It's so dull. Like what you just said. It's like, where's the life? I mean, Denise Richards, I don't want to blame her, but nobody could have performed that role.
No, that's all down to casting. That
it just doesn't.
I mean, and the role itself on paper is I mean, it is paper. That's what it is.
Yeah. And then the other thing with No Time to Die, I thought, again, I'm not upset that he dies at the end like a lot of people are. I just thought that the way that the movie was geared, it's just as, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just as brazen and bold to give Bond a happy ending with a family as it is to kill him. So it just seemed like, especially the part where he picks up the bunny and you just see it in his face, like, oh, I'm going to give this will be a good way to help me bond with my daughter. It just seemed like they were going for something. And then just, I don't know, I'm not a big fan of them killing the characters off just for feels. I just thought that to end the movie with him happy, I thought that would have been just as bold. I don't know if you guys feel the same way about that.
I'll say I like the ending of No Time to Die.
Yeah, you said that right.
I would agree with you. I'd still say that there's space for. I'd say the only issue with an ending in which it's happy for Bond is that there's and I'd certainly bold, but there's always that kind of feeling that they would try and rope Daniel Craig back into it somehow and poo-poo it, but at the same time, if that's truly like the ending that they give, and they, years later they move on to another Bond, that would still be a strong, like you say, a strong and bold ending for him as well. Like equally so as him dying, which is something he hadn't ever done before.
Yeah.
I think the only flaw in it is, I think with the is mainly in the bit before. Is in that I don't think the set piece in the garden is done as well as it could have been.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I think in order to have done that, I think they would have really needed to have made that villain bit more sound
Hmm.
to really. I think, I think that villain's set up so well at the beginning of the film,
Hmm.
but just isn't in the film enough, and then is frittered away
Yeah.
motivations wise.
Mhm.
It's the weakest part of the film.
If they'd nailed that, I think more people would have been better with it, to have Bond being bested by that villain. But because that villain was so wishy-washy in place,
Right.
I think that impacted for quite a lot of people.
It's like if Blofeld had been the one to kill him, that would have, and they killed each other, that would have been something. But like he's killed by this
Not that
guy.
Blofeld,
Yeah, not that Blofeld, but he's killed by this guy. Like he dies at the hands of this guy. Like this is what kills him. And the only other thing, because I was still anxiously awaiting your review on No Time to Die. The difference in the Madeline Swan character and the Blofeld character, it all comes down to how they're handled. Because I did not buy any of their characters in Spectre, but the way that, and maybe it's just the guy in me speaking, the way that they split Bond and Madeline apart, that struck me more than having them together. That gave me more of an emotional hook to their relationship by splitting them apart. It's kind of like at the end of the third Pirates where they split Will and Elizabeth apart. That resonates with me more than them being happy and walking off together. I don't know if that's just a guy thing, but then the way that they build Blofeld too, how the music builds and he's slowly coming down that hallway. He feels more like a threat in 30 seconds than he did in all of Spectre. And I think it all just comes down to how the direction is done and how the characters are written.
Mm-hmm. I think No Time to Die is a real, like, especially when it comes to Blofeld, it gives you a little glimpse of what could have been.
What could have been.
You know, that was
like the Paloma scene, the fun that they're, it's a might of, this is what we could have had.
Exactly, yeah.
And that film had so much heavy lifting to do.
Yeah.
To get out of, you know, it. I was quite amazed at how well it was able to execute those elements, given the hand that it was dealt with.
Yeah.
And this is why they shouldn't really do the whole arc thing, because it makes, if a film fails, it's so hard for the next film to pick that up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas when a film fails in the old format, they can just do whatever the hell they want for the next one.
Mm-hmm. And Madeline Swan as well, like, as you say, the magic in that film is simply that Madeline Swan is a character that I did not care at all on any level for, and in No Time to Die, I mean, and it's Leia Sadu as well, who's a great actress, and in No Time to Die, they salvage that relationship in a way that I never saw coming. Even when I went to see No Time to Die, I was still going in with the expectation that I wasn't going to like that aspect of the film, because I never did in the last one. I never bought it. And it's always in the shadow of Eva Green's character in Casino Royale. So the magic that it works was making me care about them. And I do. You know, it's and she gives a great performance as well.
She's running after him in the train, and just the despair, and you can feel her. Again, in 30 seconds, it did more than all Spectre did with all of her time. Like, well, it's not that hard. I don't understand. Like you said, I don't understand how they bungled Spectre so bad that there's not a moment that I buy.
Me, but the production of that film is just. I'd love to be a fly on the wall and just go no. Like, it'd just be like, oh god, like that. It's that's why it's bang at the bottom of my list.
Yeah, you guys didn't
have any redeeming features whatsoever.
You did it to me again. Like I said, I think my bottom, the Roger Moore, I think A View to a Kill, Live and Let Die, and I'm sorry, Man with the Golden Gun, even though it has Christopher Lee, I think those are my least favorite Bond movies. But listening to your Spectre episode, it was like, damn it. They did it to me again. It's like, Spectre just doesn't work on any level. I can see what they're at least trying to do with those Moore movies, but Spectre's just, it's a conundrum of a movie. I don't get it. And I that's the only Bond movie that I can say that about. I don't know, but it's like what, 2:00 out there where you guys are? I'm sorry, we're keeping you on for so long, but
no,
it's midnight.
I've loved every minute of this conversation. I can't tell you how much. Gareth knows how much I love him. I don't know if you got that from our episode, Andy, but I'm trying to pass that out to you.
The Forrest Gump one, anyway. Like, yeah.
But
I think the only thing for me as well, like, God, I'd love an upbeat Bond theme again.
Come on, yeah.
A bit tired of. Yeah, I get. That's why I get. Yeah, it's like it works better for No Time to Die, but they shouldn't have had
Right.
Sam Smith song or even the Radiohead song
Mhm.
in Spectre. I mean, that again, like you were saying before, that should have been the fun movie.
Yeah.
That should have been the fun, breezy movie.
Instead of Skyfall 2. Yeah.
And I think they tried wedging that in, like, but it just none of it worked. And again, like it's one of Hoyt van Hoytema's off days.
Ugliest. Yeah.
as
You said
well.
it was
Like,
ugly.
it doesn't feel like one of his films either.
Mhm.
And also,
how odd
given
is
his
that? How odd is it?
sensibilities, it's not a great match.
Yeah.
Like even like, you know, I wouldn't even someone like Greg Fraser, I wouldn't want to work on a Bond film because it's not a great match.
hmm
Bond needs to be quite colorful, I think.
Yeah.
One of the things that really separates it out, and when you do that and it's all muted colors and stuff, it's especially when you're trying to do a film called Spectre, it's just it's just
Yeah. Didn't deliver at all.
didn't deliver. I mean, again, it's just to have the audacity to call your film Spectre and not deliver in any way
Yeah.
at all. I remember again, we remember being so excited at the press conference when they announced the title of the film and everything.
hmm
That was a magical day.
It really was. We were so happy.
Yeah. Well, that's I kind of think that's why No Time to Die felt so refreshing. It wasn't that. And it's another reason.
I get annoyed. I think I get annoyed at people for really trashing No Time to Die. I mean, it's not like a perfect film or anything, but for really trashing it, mainly because of they don't like the ending.
Yeah.
Everything else in the film, and it's just bizarre. Like they'll just literally discount it when it's doing so many cool things,
hmm
and it's doing so many just basic things so much better.
Yeah.
It just baffles me that it's very much like a last Jedi situation. Really, it is like the Last Jedi of the Bond series at the moment, because no one seems to criticize. Well, I think it's getting a bit more, but no one seems to criticize Force Awakens for all the things that the Last Jedi has to follow through.
Yeah.
So many things in the Force Awakens when you think about it that are actively not making anything work. Like there's no ground, there's no even the setup. There's no work done to make that make any sense.
I've always said that the Force Awakens, the characters don't have an arc. They end the movie looking for an arc. Rey is literally holding the saber out for Luke, give me some purpose. It's like you took a whole movie to tell a character that they need to find purpose instead of finding the purpose. And so, the reaction to The Last Jedi is funny because, well, they had nothing to work on, guys. What are you? It's not subverting anything. there's like nothing set up. I don't know, but that's crazy. No Time to Die. I think the ending doesn't ruin it for me. What bothers me in the movie is how if you're trying to make this a separate Bond, it's like, why do you lean so heavy on Her Majesty's Secret Service and tie it back to a history? That part took me out of the movie as far as, well, now I just want to watch On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I don't want to. And that happens a lot with movies when they start referencing other things. When they have the Superman theme in Justice League, I'm like, well, now I want to watch Superman. I don't want to watch this. You know what I mean? That's a personal thing. Anyway.
No, that's that tightrope I was talking about earlier in terms of like having it being a celebration of a series. Is and presenting the tropes is you always run the tightrope of just making people want to just watch the thing that came before.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
And if they already have that, they'll just go back to what they know. They won't keep going back to this new thing. To
the live action Disney remakes. Why would you?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, okay. Well, this has been awesome. I'm going to say it again and again. I appreciate you guys. So thanks for doing this, and we'll have to do this again soon.
No, I appreciate you, and I say it every time, but I said it last time. But thanks for all the support that you've given us as well, and
Oh,
all of the suggestions as well, recommendations. We've done a few of them over the years, and I said it last time, but I'd be happy to come back on any film, especially any Alien film.
okay.
That's my thing. That Alien is my Bond.
Okay.
so if you ever go over that, I'll be more than happy to come back. But yeah, thank you very much for having us as well.
Yeah, thank you for being you. All right. Thank you, guys. We'll talk to you again soon, okay?
Yeah. Take care, mate.
All right. We want to offer a special thanks again to Gareth and Andy of the Popcorn Digest podcast. Please check them out. If, like we've said multiple times here, if it wasn't for them and their show and their kind of contribution to the podcasting world, we wouldn't be here today. So we owe a lot to Popcorn Digest. So please check them out.
Yeah.
Again, I don't like it when one of us, for whatever reason, can't be here. So I do want to get your general thoughts on The Spy Who Loved Me. We already had a good conversation on it. Just as a general kind of closeout, what were your thoughts on the movie? If you had anything that you wanted to say about James Bond or the movie or anything in general.
Well, I do have a few thoughts, not many, but before I do my real quick review, anything that you didn't mention that you want to mention?
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, like we talked about in the episode, we could have talked forever about James Bond, but I guess the thing that we didn't talk about, the whole section on the submarine after Agent Triple X has been kidnapped and taken away, and then Bond is, he breaks out of his chains or whatever, and then he frees the American, the British soldiers, everybody. They kind of have a mutiny or a battle scene. I like that whole sequence because all of a sudden it gave it like kind of a seriousness and there was a suspense to it. You know how they have to fight back against Stromberg's forces, and then they have to Bond has to remove the nuclear, like the bomb part of the nuclear missile out of the housing. That's really tense moment, and then he has to travel on the camera like up above so he can blow up like the control room, which they can't get into. And then as soon as they do that, they run into the captain who's dying, who says, "Oh, there's no stopping it. The boats that we captured are going to fire at each other." So then they have to figure out a way to stop the boats from the missiles from blowing up the world or whatever, and they rearrange it so that the missiles aim at each other. That was really neat. And then on top of that, they have to figure out a way to get out of the tanker. I thought that whole sequence was really well done. Especially for a movie that's overall really silly. I just thought it was great to see them buckle down and actually give us a suspenseful sequence. So that's what we didn't talk about. I wanted to mention that.
Okay. Well, I'll quickly tell you what I liked first. Really, my wife should be here telling you what she thinks because she's the Bond expert in our
Okay.
family, not me. I mean, I did watch Bond occasionally growing up. I saw several with you when we were in high school.
Yeah.
And I've seen all the newer ones. I haven't seen a lot of the older ones, though. I know I've seen probably a handful of the Sean Connery ones. Um, I haven't seen the George Lazenby. That's on Her Majesty's Secret Service, right?
Right. Right.
But I did see the Becoming Bond Hulu documentary, so I have seen that. So I feel like I've seen it.
Yeah.
um, I've seen a few Roger Moores. I think I've seen both Timothy Dalton ones, and I've seen all the Pierce Brosnan ones and all of the Daniel Craig ones.
Okay.
So having seen several Bond movies, I will say real quickly that I think Pierce Brosnan is my favorite Bond.
Okay.
I like Sean Connery and I like Timothy Dalton, and I don't know if I like Roger Moore. Like I just don't know. He has like a very bland like just
Yeah.
delivery of lines, and there's not a lot of like personality or charisma there, and I don't really feel like he embodies the Bond character as much as some of the other actors did.
Yeah. And
Um,
Andy basically described that as when you watch those movies, it's James Bond as Roger Moore.
yeah.
So yeah, I definitely see what you're
Well,
saying.
Well, here's the thing. Pierce Brosnan, I grew up watching Remington Steele, and
Yeah.
that was a very kind of exciting show for me, and I always liked that character. And so it was an easy transition from Remington Steele to James Bond. And so I accepted that very easily. Oh, yeah, of course he's James Bond. You know what I mean? And so I had no problem with that. I don't so much like the Daniel Craig either because it's more of just like an action movie. It's not really a James Bond movie.
Hmm.
And I think in the Casino Royale, the first one he was in, I think they tried to like get rid of all the traditional James Bond things, like he doesn't say Bond, James Bond. He doesn't ask for the martini, shaken,
Yeah.
not stirred. All those things you expect from a Bond movie, they don't do in that one. And it's kind of like, well, this is a Bond movie, isn't it? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it was kind of a letdown. But anyway, The Spy Who Loved Me. The things I liked. I did like the effort and what they put into the production design and the
Yeah.
sets. I love that set at the end. I think that was great. That's very James Bondy. And so I was like, okay, I can buy into this. This is what I was expecting from this movie. And so I did like that. A lot of effort, a lot of work went into it, you can tell. Um, let's see, what else did I like? Ah, it was as silly as it was. I did kind of like the Jaws character, even though he was like indestructible. Like
Yeah.
you couldn't kill the guy. It was silly. The fight scenes were silly, and the choreography was silly with him. But it was funny that he kept surviving. It was like, of course he survived. Like when that car hits the roof and he walks out of the building, like, oh, of course,
Yeah.
there he is again. So I even though it was kind of silly, I did
Mhm.
kind of like it. So. Mainly because it's a Bondy thing to do. It's more James Bond. You got that the character, and I kept wanting to call him Iron Jaws McGinty, but I don't know if that's because of the jerk.
Yeah.
But anyway, um, yeah. So what did I say? Roger Moore, not a big fan of. I also think the Triple X character. I didn't think she was that fantastic of a spy. Like, I don't know how she was the best spy that they had in Russia. It's like
Yeah.
she's your best spy, you know. But I thought again she was actually kind of bland, and she didn't really have any. So the two of them together, it was whenever they had scenes together, I was like, oh my gosh, how boring is this? Like, I just had a really hard time with their no chemistry really between those two characters. But if you had someone like Sean Connery, you know what I mean, it would have been different. If you had someone like Timothy Dalton or Pierce Brosnan, even with a bland actress playing the Bond girl, you could have had a better scene. You know what I mean, with a better
Yeah.
actor. Maybe that's just because I don't think Roger Moore did that good of a job. Um, it was a little long for my taste, but I guess they're all kind of,
Yeah.
2 hours or so. But I mean, it does its job though. Like it has the car with the gadgets. It has the intrigue. It has the main villain guy. And, for all of it, if you want that in a Bond movie, then it delivers. And so it gives you what you want. And so overall it's good for a Bond movie.
Okay. Well, you liking Pierce Brosnan, that you said something very interesting, and that's exactly what Andy and Gareth mentioned. It's like the Bond that you like is typically the one that you grow up on, right, or the one that
Yeah.
you're used to, and so that the different flavors of Bonds, there's something for everybody. Like people are diehard Roger Moores, people are diehard Sean Connerys, people are diehard Timothy Daltons. The question is like, how do we have a meeting of the minds to just say what we appreciate about the character and what we appreciate about the movies and what each actor brings to it? So that's definitely in line with everything that they said and brought to the
Yeah.
table for the movie. So yeah,
Okay.
it's funny because you're more in line on The Spy Who Loved Me with them. I'm higher on The Spy Who Loved Me than all three of you, but that's okay. Again, it just depends on how we kind of look at it. But yeah, I mean, it was fun finally talking about a Bond movie. If we're going to talk about another one, I know GoldenEye, that was my first James Bond movie that was mine, that my mom didn't introduce me to or didn't put in front of me. It was the first movie that I got excited about, that I went to the theater to see, that I had an actual opinion on, that wasn't formulated by anything else. So if we talk about GoldenEye, I'm definitely going to want to have them back, and we'll have all four of us hopefully on to talk about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, the internet works. Okay, so that was The Spy Who Loved Me. We've got our James Bond out of the way. So our next episode, Johnny, what is your choice?
All right, man. Well, we talk about it a lot, and I'm not sure why it is, but since it's a 70s movie, I figured, what the heck? Let's talk about Grease.
Oh,
Talk about John Travolta.
Wow.
And,
Okay. That is awesome. Sweet. Yeah, you've done the Vince Fontaine voice for us, so maybe you'll do a little bit more of that. But yeah, I'm gonna love talking about 40-year-olds as teenagers.
yeah.
All right, Grease. That's great. So until then, we meet again. Remember, my name is Lundberg, Darren Lundberg,
And I'm Craddock, Johnny Craddock.
and we'll see you guys next time.